Chapter 880. The living room of the warmly and luxuriously decorated villa shone with all kinds of lights and shadows. The lights in the living room were dimmed. On the huge projection screen that almost occupied the entire wall, all kinds of pictures kept flickering. Yellow sand fluttered in the air. An explosion of raging flames. Domineering sword light. His Majesty sat on the sofa and watched these pictures. He had been silent for a long time. Jiang Guochu sat on the sofa on the other side with a solemn face. From time to time, he glanced in the direction of His Majesty with undisguised curiosity. On the screen was the picture of the Desert War. From beginning to end. It sounded like nothing, but in fact, it was shocking enough. The Jiang family of South America naturally had its own information channels in Zhongzhou State. Not only the Jiang family of South America, but also Jifeng Sword Training School in East Island had its own pawns that had been operating for many years. But unsurprisingly, they couldn't get any video images about the Desert War at all. It was said that those who were qualified to pay attention to the Desert War could be regarded as leaders of Zhongzhou State. In terms of authority, they had reached the level of Zhongzhou State councillors. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for countries and forces in the world to cultivate their pawns to such a level. But His Majesty could directly watch everything about the Desert War, including all the details. What did this mean? And this kind of watching was not the video that was obtained afterward. The picture on the screen was a little delayed, but there was no doubt that it was a real live broadcast. This also meant that His Majesty had at least one councillor's connections in Zhongzhou State, and he had enough influence to let this councillor bear all the risks for him. For the Jiang family of South America, this news was even more important than the shocking sword stroke in the video. "Your Majesty!" Moraid suddenly called out. In the middle of the sofa, His Majesty gave a faint and watched the sword stroke in the video over and over again. The Desert War was over. But he kept playing the picture of that moment, over and over again. "What should we do now?" Moraid's tone was a little hesitant. The operation of the alliance of several forces to infiltrate Beihai had reached the final stage. The final battle was imminent, and the whole dark world was waiting for the result. But now Li Tianlan left the desert directly. The minister of the army headquarters personally took him back to Yuzhou. This attitude could not be more obvious. What was worse was that Li Tianlan might have stood by and watched the game between Zhongzhou State and Beihai, but after the blockade, Li Tianlan and Beihai would definitely join hands. Whether it was the termination plan, the blockade action, or the large number of elites of the Nightmare Troop who died in the desert, Li Tianlan and Chen Fangqing were destined to be irreconcilable enemies. This kind of personal grudge was magnified countless times at the most critical moment. Not to mention how Li Tianlan would retaliate against Chen Fangqing. At least now the more Chen Fangqing wanted to do something, the less likely Li Tianlan would let him do it. The 100,000-strong army moved majestically, but the blockade did not last more than 2 days. They expected the blockade to last at least half a month. The time difference meant too many things. Moray didn't know whether to say that the Beijiang military region was incompetent or that Emperor Dong's palace was too strong. In short, the result was there. Emperor Dong's palace, which had suffered heavy losses, had found its real core. In the next decisive battle in North Sea, they would also face Li Tianlan, and even face that sword. Moraid couldn't block that sword. He didn't want to find any reason or excuse, and there was no need. He really couldn't block it. He was now only half a step away from the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he could take this half a step in this period of time and become a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm, he still couldn't block that sword. Even if he had the Pope's coronation, even if he was really at the peak of the invincible realm, Gu Qianchuan's death was still vivid in his mind. Moraid could be sure that at that moment, no matter if it was Gu Qianchuan or other experts at the peak of the invincible realm, as long as they stood in that position and faced that sword light, there would be no possibility of survival. "Are you afraid?" His Majesty lowered his head, looked at the sword light shuttling in the screen, and chuckled. The video had been played in slow motion. But the sword light on the screen was still like wind and lightning, insufferably arrogant. "I can't block this sword strike," Moraid said seriously. He was talking about the sword strike on the screen. The power of this sword strike was not as good as the eternal sword strike that injured the Chosen One in Eastern Europe. It was also not as good as the sword strike that the unidentified Chosen One made against Mount Dibbing about a year ago. But in terms of scene, this sword strike could be said to be the most gorgeous. This sword flew thousands of miles, rushed through mountains, rivers, and seas, tore up the ambitious team, the steel torrent, and tens of thousands of troops. After its power continued to weaken, it still killed Gu Qianchuan, who was holding a murderous weapon, in a flash. It could still kill someone at the peak of the invincible realm. Moraid couldn't block this sword strike from a distance. If it was a sword strike at a close distance, he couldn't block it. If you can't block it, then you can't block it. You don't need to block it. His Majesty's voice was gentle. And the state of this sword is a bit special. It can be regarded as a murderous weapon. Its power will only get weaker and weaker. It is not as terrible as you think. At this stage, in my opinion, Li Tianlan is the most terrible. Moraid wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. His Majesty seemed to know what he wanted to ask. He glanced at him and said quietly, "The final battle will continue. If this sword strike really appears on the battlefield, I will deal with it." His tone was flat and casual. Thinking of His Majesty's strange domain, Moraid calmed down slightly. His Majesty's finger gently slid across the screen, and the sword strike was played back again, tearing apart heaven and earth, moving forward with indomitable will. His Majesty's eyes were fixed on the sword light. The curve of his mouth was still there, but his eyes were full of disgust. Little by little, the pain that seemed to come from the depths of his memory gradually spread all over his body. His body trembled subconsciously, as if there were countless sword energy penetrating his body. The vague clouds and starlight shrouded him. He closed his eyes, smiled a little ferociously and murmured, "Wuqing, it's been a long time." The sword light was reflected in the eyes of many people. His Majesty watched it again. Wang Shengxiao was also watching it. For anyone who aspired to the end of martial arts, that sword light could be regarded as the most beautiful scenery in the world. His Majesty's eyes were full of disgust. But Wang Xingxiao's eyes were full of appreciation. That kind of look was not surprise or shock, but pure appreciation. It was undisguised, unreserved, and with a little excitement. Phoenix sat next to him and could clearly see the emotions in her nephew's eyes. To be exact, it was as if he was looking at something that belonged to him and expressing his joy. "You want that sword?" Phoenix said slowly. It was not a question. It was a statement without any emotional ups and downs. "That was my sword in the first place." Wang Xingxiao turned to look at her and said with a soft smile, "Or it is the sword of the Wang family of Beihai, the invincible sword in the world, strong beyond imagination." When did the sword of the Wang family of Beihai recognize an outsider as its master? Phoenix's voice was a little sarcastic. Wang Xingxiao didn't care. He seemed to have adapted to this aunt's cynicism toward the Wang family of Beihai. He looked at the screen quietly and said calmly, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that it will return to the Wang family of Beihai and become the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai's continued glory." "You are no match for Li Tianlan," Phoenix said calmly. "Far from it. You should know this yourself, so you want to take the sword. Where does your confidence come from?" "I'm not taking the sword." Wang Shengxiao shook his head, and his voice was a little stubborn. "That is the sword of the Wang family of Beihai. Now it should just go home." "Li Tianlan won't think so. If the invincible sword really goes to Beihai, do you think Li Tianlan will let you go?" Phoenix sneered. "Does Li Tianlan's attitude matter? What matters is that I have the right to take back what belongs to the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Xingxiao's voice was a little cold. He looked at the sword light on the screen and narrowed his eyes tightly. "With this sword I can sweep the world. What can Li Tianlan do if he is not satisfied? You are courting death." Phoenix sat up straight and said seriously. "Don't worry." Wang Shengxiao laughed. "Aunt, Li Tianlan is not an enemy. The ownership of Xinyuan Feng is not decided by Li Tianlan, nor by me. Its only result is to become a divine weapon of the Wang family of Beihai. As for Emperor Dong's palace, we will give enough compensation. What kind of compensation do you think can satisfy Li Tianlan's appetite? Phoenix shook her head. Wang Shengshao was silent for a while, and then said quietly, a group. He paused and continued, a supergroup that can compete with the Southeast Group. Chapter 881. It was snowing all over Yuzhou. The heavy snow had been falling from last night to nearly noon, and it had become an extremely rare snowstorm in Yuzhou in recent years. Li Tianlan stood in front of the French window in his bedroom, looking down at the large urban area. He looked casual and comfortable. The room was as warm as spring. Outside the window, it was snowing heavily. The wild snowstorm covered every street and every building in sight. The whole world was pale and quiet. The scene was extremely quiet, but also extremely vivid. Li Tianlan closed his eyes subconsciously. He had returned to Yuzhou last night, but he did not go to Prince Yong's mansion or the Bai family's manor. Instead, he chose a hotel on Chang'an Street. It was not that he treated Dongqing Wudi as an outsider. Prince Yong's mansion was originally his and Dongqing Rushi's wedding house. The Bai family chose the site and the Dongqing family paid for it. But now Dongqing Rushi was unconscious in Tian'an. If he lived there with Qin Weibai, he always felt that it was a little inappropriate. It was even more inappropriate to live in the Bai family. Qin Weibai also had a property in Yuzhou, but no one had cleaned it for a long time. In addition, Li Tianlan was going to the Hidden Dragon Sea today, so he simply found a hotel nearby to stay. From Beijiang to Yuzhou, it was thousands of miles away in one night. It seemed very unusual. But for Li Tianlan, it was a completely different world. In the desert, he was pure and quiet. He didn't need to think too much about anything. The only thing he needed to pursue was his own swordsmanship. And in Yuzhou, he was the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, the Emperor Dong of the Dark World. The Desert War had ended. The Beijiang military region and Emperor Dong's palace had tasted the bitter fruit that they didn't want to taste at all. The cruel reality was in front of him. Li Tianlan could already control his emotions. But he seemed to be still immersed in the state of raising swords in the desert, so that he still felt a little uncomfortable when he came to Yuzhou from the desert. He found it difficult to adapt to his current perspective of the world. It was an indescribable feeling. During Li Tianlan's 2 years in the desert, there had always been rumors in the Dark World that he was the #1 expert in the Dark World after Lin Fengting. Li Tianlan knew this. He wasn't sure if he felt pressure or how much pressure he felt. But it was undeniable that he had been making progress in the past 2 years. When he was about to break through the invincible realm, his progress in all aspects was limited to a certain height because of his body. Moreover, because he hadn't fought with anyone, he couldn't even tell how much he had improved. That year, Li Tianlan was less than 25 years old. It was really difficult for his body to support him officially entering the domain of the invincible realm. Therefore, in the process of nurturing the sword, he chose another direction of martial arts. Therefore, all the progress of the last 2 years has been completely and utterly unrestrained, in a most perfect way. Show it. The muddle-headed Li Tianlan didn't feel anything. However, when Shenyuan Feng entered the desert, when he became completely clear-minded and restrained his killing intent for the time being, when he returned to Yuzhou province and completely recovered his composure, he finally realized that something was different. The world might not have changed, but his perspective had changed. It was a kind of change that he had never thought of before. To be exact, it was a perspective of truly standing at the peak of personal strength in the Dark World. Everything in sight. Snow filled the sky, skyscrapers, dense streets, surging traffic, and a boundless world. All of this became extremely fragile in his eyes. It was so fragile that he could easily destroy everything with a flick of his finger. This feeling made Li Tianlan feel novel and scared. He had almost been suppressing his desire to destroy and fight, so that he could control himself to stand here quietly. The flying snowflakes hit the French windows, making a soft sound. The breeze blew through the falling snow, and all the sounds seemed to be infinitely magnified. His perception was almost extremely sharp. Li Tianlan shook his head hard, turned around, and quietly closed the curtains. On the bed, Qin Weibai gently turned over, made a lazy sound, and opened her eyes. "Why are you awake?" Li Tianlan sat on the edge of the bed and touched her hair. Qin Weibai shook her head and rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were a little hazy and blurred. The pair of eyes that seemed to be always cold and indifferent were soft, enchanting, and captivating. She wrapped herself in a snow-white velvet quilt, put her white and tender arms on Li Tianlan's palm, and whispered, "Hug me." Li Tianlan took off his pajamas, got back into the quilt, and hugged the soft and light body beside him. Qin Weibai rubbed her face against Li Tianlan's chest and murmured, "I dreamed." "Dream?" Li Tianlan reached out and gently pinched Qin Weibai's ear and asked casually. A natural and rich fragrance filled the room. His body was so relaxed that he didn't even bother to move for a while. "I dreamed that you dumped me and told me to get out. You said you never wanted to see me again." Qin Weibai subconsciously hugged Li Tianlan, as if still immersed in the dream. Her voice was a little aggrieved and pitiful. "Ridiculous." Li Tianlan's palm made a crisp sound in the white velvet quilt. He didn't promise anything, but just laughed and scolded, "Am I a fool in your dream?" "Who knows?" Qin Weibai gently bit Li Tianlan. "Maybe I'm tired of playing." Li Tianlan sneered and looked down at Qin Weibai's cold and resentful face with a special blush. "I think you don't want to get out of bed today." "Don't." Qin Weibai screamed and seemed to wake up completely. She put one hand against Li Tianlan's chest and grabbed her clothes in a panic with the other hand. "I want to take a shower. I have an appointment today." "I can't." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and was about to say something when his phone suddenly rang. The phone is ringing. Answer the phone, be good." Qin Weibai pushed Li Tianlan and said in a soft voice. Li Tianlan shook his head and took the phone. For a moment, the soft peaks and the warm valley were far away from him. Qin Weibai put on her bathrobe, glared at Li Tianlan, and walked into the bathroom. Li Tianlan was a little annoyed. When he picked up the phone and heard the voice, his eyes became even colder. The voice on the other side of the phone was respectful, and it could even be said to be in fear and trepidation. "Hello, Your Highness Li Tianlan. I'm Little Yuan from the Cabinet Office." Just by listening to the voice, Li Tianlan could imagine the cautious picture on the other end of the phone. Li Tianlan smiled and said lightly, "Do I know you?" This sentence was direct and domineering, leaving no face for the other party. The Cabinet Office of Zhongzhou State. In terms of rank, this was a real governor-level agency. The so-called Little Yuan was not young at all, whether in age or rank. Although he was not the chief of the general office, he was the first deputy. His real job was the chief secretary of Qin Fangqing. In Zhongzhou State, he was definitely a sensitive and powerful figure. The other end of the phone did not speak for a long time, not knowing whether it was because of anger or fear. Li Tianlan did not bother to pay attention to it and hung up the phone. He looked at his watch, listened to the sound of running water in the bathroom, and slowly put on his clothes. The door of the bathroom was locked. Li Tianlan pushed it, but it did not open. "What?" Qin Weibai's fierce voice sounded, but it sounded without confidence. "I'm going to Hidden Dragon Sea," Li Tianlan said. The sound of running water in the bathroom was a little lower. Qin Weibai said, "I won't check out the room. I'll live here for the time being. What do you want to eat at noon?" "Whatever." Li Tianlan said indifferently, "I may not come back at noon, or I'll have lunch with the minister. I'll come back to pick you up then." Qin Weibai said, The door of the bathroom was gently pulled open. Qin Weibai's dreamy face was exposed because of the water vapor. She looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Li Huaqing's conditions won't be low, but his bottom line won't be too high either. Stick to what you should." "I know." Li Tianlan pinched her little nose and turned to go out. The phone rang again when he closed the door. It was still the same number. Li Tianlan thought about it and pressed the answer button. "Your Highness Li Tianlan, I'm Yuan Shi from the Cabinet Office of Zhongzhou State. Here's the thing. The Prime Minister has something to talk to you alone. It's 10:20 in the morning. The Prime Minister has half an hour. Please don't be late." The voice on the phone, which had been cautious not long ago, became righteous, but it was a little trembling. Li Tunlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said coldly, "I don't have time. Let him wait." Chapter 882. Ma Si sat quietly in the lobby of the hotel and looked down at his watch from time to time. He casually responded to the flattery of the hotel general manager with a nervous expression. The hotel had been cordoned off an hour ago. The lobby was quiet and seemed a little cold. A few essential staff members stood carefully at their posts, occasionally sneaking glances at their boss. They didn't know Ma Si, but looking at the cautious attitude of their boss, even a fool knew that this seemingly strange middle-aged man was absolutely a big shot. However, such a big shot would also wait for someone, and he had been waiting for nearly half an hour, which made everyone curious. The hotel general manager, who had been carefully accompanying Ma Si, was even more curious. He was curious and a little afraid. Yuzhou was full of high-ranking officials and people with great power. Ma Si's rank was far from the highest in Yuzhou, but looking at the whole Zhongzhou state, there were few people who were qualified to make Ma Si wait here without any temper. The first deputy director of the Zhongzhou State Office of Public Affairs. With this identity, there was no need to say anything at all. It was not the Zhongzhou State Cabinet Office of Public Affairs, nor the Zhongzhou State Army Headquarters Office. It was simply the Zhongzhou State Office of Public Affairs, an institution at the level of a counselor. The so-called first deputy director could be said to be the first secretary of Zhongzhou State. How many people in the whole Zhongzhou State were qualified to make him wait here, the first secretary of the president? The hotel general manager had carefully recalled many times, but he couldn't remember which immortal came to his hotel. "Director Ma, do you need to rush him? You are so busy every day, so..." The boss smiled and was careful. He naturally knew that the person who could make Ma Si wait here must have a powerful background, but at least he should express his attitude. Ma Si's nervous face eased a little, and he shook his head with a smile. "No, I'll be here soon." He looked down at his watch again. It was 9:40. He shook his head and gave a wry smile. It had been more than 40 minutes since the meeting time, and he hadn't even received the person. The president was also self-restrained, and he hadn't rushed him until now. The boss nodded and said with a smile, "Recently, the shop has launched a new type of black tea, which tastes good. I'll ask someone to send it over and you can have a taste." Ma Si nodded indifferently. Just as she was about to say something, the elevator door not far away slowly opened, and a young man who looked no more than 24 or 25 walked out unhurriedly. Ma Si bounced up like a spring, and a warm and respectful smile appeared on her face. He jogged away from his seat and stretched out his hands from afar. His feet moved like the wind, and his smile became more and more enthusiastic. The CO stared at this scene with his mouth agape. He subconsciously stood up and didn't know whether he should step forward or not. Ma Si's face was already smiling like a flower. His attitude was even more exaggerated than when he was with the president. "Your Highness, hello, I am Ma Si." Ma Si walked quickly to Li Tianlan and stretched out her hands. Li Tianlan shook hands with him casually and said, "Hello, Ma Ting. Sorry to keep you waiting." Not long at all. I just arrived too. It's snowing heavily today, so the road conditions are quite average." Ma Si said insincerely and held Li Tianlan's palm with both hands. Feeling his enthusiasm, Li Tianlan gave him a playful look. Ma Si's smile became more and more respectful, and he even bowed slightly subconsciously. His position might not be at the core, but there was no doubt that he was the person who could see the core clearly. As Li Huaqing's secretary, he knew the cause of a series of things and the process of all things. As for the ending, because it didn't happen, he couldn't speculate, but he already knew his leader's choice. Li Huaqing refused to continue to cooperate with Chen Fangqing. At this point, Chen Fangqing might still want to continue to be crazy, but no one dared to continue to play with him. The situation was imminent. What Li Huaqing wanted to do most now was to stabilize the already precarious situation. Li Huaqing wanted to stabilize the already precarious situation. The suppression of Beihai should be stopped. At the same time, Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan should also make enough compensation to reach a new balance. Balance was compromise. Since there was compromise, there must be sacrifice. Chen Fangqing, who launched the termination plan, blocked the desert prison, and directly caused the death of tens of thousands of people, would naturally become a sacrifice. The whole prince group would even struggle because of this. Now there was less than a year before the election. At this critical point, the prince group would suffer unprecedented losses, even greater than the loss of Emperor Dong's palace in the desert. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group, who had been holding back their anger, were eyeing covetously. Since the academics compromised, they would not give up the benefits in their hands. As for Ma Si, he naturally hoped that he could get a piece of the cake. He was Li Huaqing's secretary, and his predecessor had been sent to a province in the northwest 2 years ago. It could be said that he was a real border commander. In this election, whether Li Huaqing was re-elected or not, he would generally be sent to a position with real power. Before this election, there would be a huge exchange of interests. His name would definitely appear on the list of the academics, and he would be familiar with Li Tianlan. At that time, whether Li Tianlan would support him or not, as long as Li Tianlan did not object, Ma Si's future would be bright. Ma Si was a little emotional. He looked at Li Tianlan with full awe in his eyes. Today, this young man, who was less than 25 years old, was really important in Zhongzhou State. The Li family, the Tian'an Freedom Corps, Sai City, the Giant Group, the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and even a part of the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, all the winds and clouds gathered on Li Tianlan. Ma Si thought of the lieutenant general in the Beijiang military region who died in the hands of Li Tianlan. He thought of what Li Tianlan said to the microcamera before the lieutenant general died. That was a sentence that everyone was destined to never forget. If I really leave Zhongzhou State because of this, it is not that I betrayed Zhongzhou State, but that Zhongzhou State betrayed me. If Zhongzhou State does not betray me, I will not betray Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan might have been reluctant to say this before, but now he had enough qualifications. The combat capability standing at the peak of individual force, the future that could almost unify the dark world in the future, the thriving Emperor Dong's palace, the dense network of relationships, combining all these, Zhongzhou State had to consider the consequences of losing Li Tianlan. It was not a question of whether it could bear it. It was a question of whether it was willing to bear it. If Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan did not break through the blockade of the desert prison, it might be another story. But now Li Tianlan appeared in Yuzhou. In order to stabilize the new balance, Zhongzhou State must give Li Tianlan an explanation. Even the entire prince group had to give him an explanation. Ma Si's body trembled. Thinking of the coming wind and rain, his scalp was numb, and his whole body was trembling. Don't be nervous. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Let's go now. Don't let the president wait too long. Yes, your highness is right. Ma Si took a deep breath, bent down, and said with a smile, Your highness, please. Li Tianlan nodded and walked in front of him as if it was a matter of course. The boss of the hotel stood there and wanted to go forward, but he did not dare. His body was stiff, and he bent down subconsciously, feeling a little embarrassed. Your highness, this is the general manager of the hotel. If you have any requirements, you can tell him. Ma Si introduced him with a smile in a low voice. Your highness? What kind of strange title is this? The boss was at a loss for a moment. Li Tianlan glanced at him and nodded. My wife likes the red bean cake here very much. Yes, your highness. I'll arrange for it to be delivered to madam immediately. The CEO nodded subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded, turned around, and walked out of the hotel lobby. The CEO remained. He bent over until Li Tianlan and Ma Si walked out of the hotel. Then he straightened up a little and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He did not know who this highness was, but this person's aura was too sharp. He looked ordinary, but standing in front of him, he almost couldn't breathe. It was not until his figure completely disappeared that the CEO suddenly remembered that because he was too nervous, he did not even introduce himself. It was snowing outside the hotel. Ma Si walked down the stairs of the hotel, took a few quick steps, and personally opened the door of the car with a red flag with a special license plate. Li Tianlan sat inside and looked at the wind and snow outside the window in silence. The hotel was not far from the hidden Dragon Sea. Ma Si carefully chatted with Li Tianlan for a while and found that Li Tianlan was not in the mood to chat, so he turned on the stereo in the car. Before the music was finished, the car had slowly entered the hidden Dragon Sea. The hidden Dragon Sea was covered with silver, but the road had been cleared. The car stopped in front of Jinqiu Pavilion, and Li Tianlan's eyes were fixed on the front door of Jinqiu Pavilion. Li Huaqing was standing there with an easygoing smile and seemed to be enjoying the snow. Whether it was enjoying the snow or something else, he stood here at this time, which could be said to give Li Tianlan enough face. Ma Si quickly opened the door for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked out of the car. Tianlan is here. Li Huaqing smiled gently and waved to Li Tianlan. President. Li Tianlan nodded and looked seriously at the old man who seemed to leave a way out for himself at any time. His voice was a little cold. President, you are in a good mood. Li Huaqing laughed and walked over with a cigarette. The snow fell on him and dyed him with a faint layer of white. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and a sword intent appeared beside him. As soft as the wind, it swept the white snow on Li Huaqing. It doesn't matter. Li Huaqing walked to Li Tianlan and took a drag of the cigarette. He looked up at the white snow in the air and said meaningfully, "This snow is very clean." Li Tianlan looked at him quietly and did not speak. Walk with me. Li Huaqing patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and stepped forward. Let's have a casual chat and have lunch together. Li Tianlan followed Li Huaqing and said flatly, I'm not here to have a casual chat. Li Huaqing nodded and smiled. Then what do you want to talk about? About Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing. I don't know if I am qualified. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said softly, I remember you said 2 years ago that you are the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. I said it before I went to the desert. Li Tianlan said flatly, you said that I would be qualified to say this after I came out. Now I came out and my view has not changed. From now on, I am the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. So, Li Huaqing's voice was a little vague in the wind and snow. You're a good president. Li Tianlan said calmly, even now, I have no hostility to you. In your position, you are more qualified to say this than me. But you are not the overall situation, but the person who controls the overall situation. You have done a lot of things for Zhongzhou State and indulged a lot of things, such as the Wang family of Beihai and Qinfangqing. This may be the overall situation in your eyes. But now, I am standing here. In the future, Zhongzhou State should also take me as the most important. His voice paused and his tone became extremely tough. This is not a discussion. This is my request. The person who controls the overall situation. Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he laughed softly. His tone was a little complicated, and the question was extremely sharp. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and asked directly, Can I control you? Li Tianlan's voice was as calm as water, without any ups and downs. He said something he had said before. Zhongzhou State does not betray me, and I will not betray Zhongzhou State. Chapter 883. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan thoughtfully, and his eyes were as deep as desire. He had heard this sentence before. Li Tianlan said it in Eastern Europe, and it soon reached his ears. At that time, Li Tianlan said it reluctantly. But now he really had this qualification. That was the problem. It was not a question of whether Li Tianlan could say it or not, but whether he had this qualification. There were many reasons for love, but it was absolutely impossible to let it down. From an individual standpoint, everyone was very patriotic, but the premise of patriotism was that the country everyone loved had never let him down. Countless policies, constantly promoted reforms, and public opinion propaganda were like rays of light, radiating to all parts of the country. Everyone's life was getting better and better, and the country was getting better and better. This virtuous cycle led to the prosperity of Zhongzhou State today. For the vast majority of Zhongzhou State people, the country might owe something, but it would never let anyone down. Ordinary people were the same. So was Li Tianlan. He now stood at a high place and had the qualification to stand at a high place. Naturally, he also had the qualification to ask Zhongzhou State not to let him down. Whether he betrayed Zhongzhou State or Zhongzhou State betrayed him, when the follow-up effects continued to ferment, it would evolve into a disaster that swept the entire Zhongzhou State. He had too many things. Behind him also represented too many things. Just like what he said himself. From now on, he was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing was the president of Zhongzhou State and the most qualified person to represent Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan repeated this sentence again in front of him, and the meaning was already very obvious. You don't let me down, and I won't let you down. To put it bluntly, you have to support me this time. Li Tianlan's expression did not change at all. The two were less than 2 meters apart. Through the wind and snow, Li Huaqing could clearly feel the other party's fierce and almost tough attitude. It was like flying snow in winter falling on his face, with a slight tingling. The Prime Minister is really too impulsive. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said softly. Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at him. The other party's voice was very soft. But he knew very well that this was Li Huaqing's official statement. He had this attitude in private, and when he left Hidden Dragon Sea later, Li Huaqing's statement to the outside world would also be the same. The next turmoil in Zhongzhou State would also start from this sentence. This isn't just impulsive. Li Tianlan said flatly, this is a crime. His so-called impulse directly buried the most elite troops of Emperor Dong's palace in the desert, and tens of thousands of soldiers in the Beijiang military region became souls of the dead. For someone as powerful as him, one decision can easily kill tens of thousands of people. Even if he is the Prime Minister, he can't bear the consequences of this series of consequences. I don't need to pay for his mistakes. What do you want to do? Li Huaqing declined to comment. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. There's nothing much to say. No matter who it is, they must pay the price. Li Tianlan's voice was as cold as ice. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stopped in his tracks, looking at the hidden ocean in front of him. Under the wind and snow, the surface of the Hidden Dragon Sea was calm. I can ask him to apologize to you, of course, in private, but the cabinet will increase its support for Emperor Dong's palace in the future. In addition, the Prime Minister has been too busy recently. His health isn't very good either, so he can go to the south to recuperate. Xingyang can temporarily take charge of the cabinet's affairs. I believe that Comrade Wu Jingmin can become Xingyang's right-hand man. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He didn't care about private apologies. No matter how humble Chen Fangqing was, it was meaningless. But to increase the support for Emperor Dong's palace, it had to be done. With less than a year to go before the election, asking Chen Fangqing to recuperate in the south was basically equivalent to an early retirement. The second Prime Minister, Hua Xingyang, was in charge of the cabinet's work, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Wu Jingmin, was further promoted to the second Prime Minister, which was equivalent to a director's position. There was no doubt that this was the offer of the academics, and also an explanation that Zhongzhou State intended to give Li Tianlan. A director's position, this was the most important bargaining chip. Neither Li Huaqing nor Li Tianlan worried about whether these things would become a reality. Not to mention the academics that Li Huaqing completely controlled and the giant group that fully supported Li Tianlan. Even within the Prince Group, dissatisfaction with Chen Fangqing had reached the limit after the blockade operation failed. This failure not only put Chen Fangqing's position in jeopardy, but also the leaders of the Prince Group were psychologically prepared for the great loss of vitality of the group. The Prince Group just wanted to let this matter pass as soon as possible and reach a new balance, so it was impossible for them to oppose Wu Jingmin. Therefore, in Li Huaqing's words, although the director's position was an important bargaining chip, the focus was on Hua Xingyang. This was a deal. Li Huaqing was almost certain to be re-elected, and Hua Xingyang was the vice prime minister of Zhongzhou State, so he also had one more term. However, it seemed that the academics were no longer satisfied with the position of the vice prime minister. Now they wanted to take this opportunity to promote Hua Xingyang. Li Tianlan needed the support of the academics. And on the matter of Hua Xingyang, the academics also needed the support of Li Tianlan and the giant group. Once the academics succeeded, the president and the prime minister of Zhongzhou State would be in the academics, and the academics would enter a period of real strength. Li Tianlan was expressionless and silent. When talking to a leader like Li Huaqing, the other party would not point out a lot of things. If he could not consider any point, he might suffer a loss. To be honest, Li Tianlan was really not used to this kind of communication. He had a headache talking for a while, but at least for the time being, he could not change anything. Li Huaqing quietly waited for Li Tianlan's answer. "I don't need his apology." Li Tianlan thought for a long time and said slowly. Li Huaqing frowned slightly and waited patiently for a few seconds to make sure that Li Tianlan had finished what he wanted to say. He just didn't need to apologize. He didn't mention anything about the arrangement of the cabinet. If he didn't mention it, he wouldn't express his position. To be exact, he didn't agree. He didn't agree to let Hua Xingyang control the cabinet. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. If it was before, Li Tianlan's will was not important at all. But at this time, if Li Tianlan said no to Hua Xingyang really couldn't do it. The war in the desert was over. Chen Fangqing had been in a desperate situation where there was no retreat. He was bound to fight desperately and use all his means to find some opportunities in the dying struggle. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan not only had the full support of the giant group behind him, but also the Wang family of Beihai, who wanted to stabilize the situation with the help of Li Tianlan, and Emperor Dong's palace, would also agree to Li Tianlan's request. The honeymoon period between the giant group and the southeast group would not change at least before this election. If Li Tianlan said no, then, unless Li Huaqing was willing to join hands with the prince group to set off another game, it really wouldn't work. Fortunately, Li Tianlan didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Did this mean that there was still hope? He thought for a moment and said slowly, "What do you think about the Prime Minister?" This was undoubtedly a test. He started with Chen Fangqing and slowly transitioned to the cabinet to sound out Li Tianlan's conditions. For people at Li Huaqing's level, there was nothing that couldn't be discussed. It was nothing more than checks and balances from various perspectives. But Li Tianlan really didn't want Hua Xingyang to control the cabinet. It was impossible for him to agree to this matter. Perhaps in Li Huaqing's view, giving the giant group a director position was already very sincere, but Li Tianlan didn't think so. In Li Huaqing's mind, Wu Jingmin becoming a director was tantamount to adding a heavyweight position to the giant group. The current giant group belonged to Dongqing Wudi. The future belonged to Li Tianlan. All Dongqing Wudi's actions in the past 2 years showed this. But that wasn't what Li Tianlan wanted. What he wanted was a group of his own. There might be a group of people added from the giant group, but what he wanted was a brand new group that belonged to him, one that could help the giant group but could stand firm in Zhongzhou state on its own. For such a large group, a director position was necessary. In Li Tianlan's mind, the ideal candidate was also Wu Jingmin. Wu Jingmin was the best choice in terms of ability and experience. The only drawback was that he was a little old and could only serve for one more term. Li Tianlan hoped that Wu Jingmin could take this position, and naturally, he also hoped that he could use this term to formally build the structure of the new group. But if Hua Xingyang controlled the cabinet, and Li Huaqing was the president, Wu Jingmin's pressure could be imagined, and he wouldn't even have much room to play. Li Tianlan absolutely didn't want to see this situation. "I don't have any ideas." Li Tianlan shook his head slowly. It was not suitable for him to say too much to Li Huaqing today, and Li Huaqing wouldn't say too much to him either. This game that started 2 years ago had gone on until now. Although the situation was clear, the final result had not appeared. In other words, there were still many variables. The termination plan was exposed, and the desert war came to an end. Li Tianlan reappeared in Yuzhou, which was a stage victory. But no one could say that Chen Fangqing was really on the road to death. After all, the decisive battle in Beihai had not yet begun. If Chen Fangqing defeated the Wang family of Beihai in one fell swoop, the situation would undoubtedly become more complicated. But in the current situation, Chen Fangqing didn't have many chances. It was also because of this that Li Huaqing would meet Li Tianlan. What Li Tianlan needed was Li Huaqing's attitude. And Li Huaqing also gave a clear attitude. For Li Tianlan, this was enough. He still had too many things to consider about what the new group would be like. He looked at the flying snow in front of him and said calmly, "He did something I don't want to see, so I will naturally do something he doesn't want to see." "What is it?" Li Huaqing asked subconsciously. Li Tianlan laughed. In the wind and snow, his smiling face was a little cold and ferocious. "His termination plan failed. Do you think my termination plan will succeed?" Chapter 884. Deep Sea City, Nanyue Province. The lights shone in the conference room on the top floor of the skyscraper. The directors of the Haoyue Group shook their heads and sighed as they walked out of the conference room. Some of them even had well-hidden resentment on their faces. The chairman of the Haoyue Group, Qin Li, squinted at the directors who were leaving. His eyes were gloomy and his face was pale. "Chairman Qin." A woman in her 30s with an alluring figure and a mature temperament walked over with a folder in her arms. She wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Li looked at her anxious face, and he suddenly felt a wave of frustration in his heart. He picked up the teacup and took a big gulp of tea. After he thought he was mentally prepared, he nodded and said, "Go ahead." "There are some problems with the number 6 plot that was auctioned in Deep Sea City. The approval process can't be completed for now." The woman, who was both Chen Li's personal assistant and mistress, said cautiously, "Don't worry about the approval process. It's his business to start the construction ahead of schedule. I'll find someone to take care of it." Chen Li waved his hand impatiently. The assistant nodded and said softly, 3 hours ago, Malaysian groups stopped their cooperation with us at the same time. One of them has already paid the penalty fee." Malaysian. Chen Li's eyebrows twitched. His eyes were cold and gloomy. However, he was indeed under a lot of pressure. He could only shake his head and say, "What else?" "Many of our subsidiaries were seized in the morning. Liaodong's Snow Mountain Heavy Industry, Zhongyuan's Xiongzhou Real Estate, Jiangzhi's Red Flag Entertainment, Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group, and..." Chen Li suddenly raised his head and stared into the secretary's eyes. He seemed to be in disbelief and asked, "Where?" Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group." The assistant obviously knew what Chen Li was asking and gave an accurate answer again. Her face was a little pale. Chen Li was silent for a long time. Tian Fu's Yuanhua Group. Tian Fu Province. This was the birthplace of the Haoyue Group. The Prime Minister, Chen Fangqing, had set up the Haoyue Group when he was the deputy governor of Tianfu. The headquarters of the Haoyue Group was currently located in the Nanyue Province, but they had never given up on the management of Heaven's Sanctum. This was a behemoth with a market value of more than 300 billion Zhongzhou dollars. Among all the private enterprises in Zhongzhou State, Haoyue Group could be said to be one of the strongest hegemons. Its industries were spread across dozens of countries around the world, and it could make its voice heard in every province of Zhongzhou State. Central Plains, Liaodong of course, Chen Li could understand that the subsidiary companies in Zhejiang and other places were in trouble, and he was mentally prepared for it. But Heaven's Sanctum? How could this be? The Yuanhua Group was the most important subsidiary of the Haoyue Group in Heaven's Sanctum, as well as a huge source of tax revenue for the entire Heaven's Sanctum. Just what kind of determination would make the Heaven's Sanctum decide to cut down this cash cow? Chen Li subconsciously took out his phone and wanted to make a call. However, when he opened his contact list, he paused. The assistant couldn't help but take a step forward and said hesitantly, "President Chen." Chen Li turned around and looked at him expressionlessly. "Did something happen to the Prime Minister?" The assistant's voice was cautious. The corners of Chen Li's mouth twitched, revealing a bitter smile. "Accident?" He didn't know whether it was an accident or not. The assistant might not know some of the inside stories, but Chen Li naturally knew enough about the Desert War. He had never thought that Chen Fangqing, who was like a god in his mind, would one day be forced into such a situation by a young man. He was Chen Fangqing's nephew. His biological nephew. The Haoyue Group was founded with the support of Chen Fangqing. For many years, the Haoyue Group had been worthy of Zhongzhou State and didn't owe anything to the people. As one of the leading private enterprises, it also played a huge role and made a lot of contributions to the society. And Zhongzhou State also deserved its contributions. This was a win-win situation. But now, was the situation going to change? Chen Li silently put down his phone. He originally wanted to call Chen Fangqing, but he suddenly thought that if he handled this matter well, could he also relieve some of his uncle's pressure? Chen Li stood up, made up his mind, and said calmly, "Prepare the car. Let's go to Tianfu province." The assistant turned around and left in a hurry. Chen Li changed his clothes and went downstairs quietly. Chen Li's exclusive black Bentley had stopped in front of the group building. Chen Li sat in the car with the assistant. He unconsciously put one hand on the assistant's slender and elastic thigh in silk stockings and said calmly, "To the airport." The driver started the car. The car slowly left the Haoyue group building, entered the road, and went straight to the airport expressway. Chen Li's palm gently slid on the assistant's thigh, and the assistant intimately moved closer to him. Chen Li closed his eyes and thought about the next situation. The assistant's phone rang. She picked up the phone. After listening to a few words, her charming face suddenly became a little ugly. "Director Chen." She gently twisted her body. "What's wrong?" Chen Li opened his eyes. But he didn't hear the answer. The assistant's rosy and beautiful little mouth was moving. But all the sounds were completely drowned out in an instant. The ear-piercing whistle occupied all of Chen Li's hearing. The Bentley passed by the intersection. A truck that was originally waiting for the red light suddenly rushed over at full speed. The engine, which was obviously specially modified, instantly raised the horsepower of the truck to the limit. The ear-piercing whistle roared through the whole street. The truck had reached its limit of speed, and like a mad bull, it directly hit the Bentley. There was a loud bang. The body of the Bentley was completely sent flying in an instant. The huge impact completely deformed the car. The bulletproof car window suddenly shattered, and the car rolled from the air to the ground. The huge truck did not stop at all, and directly ran over the truck in a barbaric and almost brutal way. Blood splattered through the broken windows. The weight of the truck caused the fuel tank to burst. A loud explosion suddenly rang out on the streets of Deep Sea City. Flames soared into the sky. The Bentley and the truck were instantly turned into spare parts in the huge explosion. Huading, Jinjiang Commercial Building. A young woman in her early 20s walked out of the gate of the commercial building with a proud look on her face. Behind her, two young men with impeccable height and appearance followed her, one on the left and the other on the right. Each of them was carrying countless bags of various sizes. "Qin Shui, should we eat first?" One of the boys asked cautiously. The woman named Qin Shui was not very beautiful. She was ordinary, but her aura was extremely arrogant. Behind her were two handsome men who could drive countless girls crazy in any university. Against the backdrop of a lot of luxury goods, she walked in front like a noble palace master, or rather, a powerful queen. Tired? Chen Shui turned the car key in her hand. Looking at the two so-called Prince Charming behind her, a strange light flashed in her eyes. Not tired. The two boys smiled along, but their smiles were a little reserved. "Let's go to Park U." Chen Shui stretched, squinted her eyes and smiled. "I'll eat first and then you can eat. This is your reward. Do you like it?" Almost at the same time, the two boys thought of the big bed in the luxury suite of Park U Hotel. They felt a little awkward, but also a little excited, so they nodded subconsciously. Shui, her eyes were so moist that they seemed to be dripping water. With a little desire, she turned around and strode forward in her high heels. "Hurry up, or there will be punishment." The two boys started to jog directly. The three of them walked quickly into the underground parking lot. Chen Shui sat in her Mercedes-Benz. The two boys were like bullied wives, squeezing in the back with a pile of luxury goods. The parking lot was very quiet. Chen Shui licked her lips and suddenly said softly, "Do you dare to do it here?" The two boys behind her suddenly breathed heavily. Chen Shui smiled charmingly. "I'm teasing you two fools." She inserted the key, started the car, and stepped on the accelerator. "Let's go, Vroom," the sound of the engine sounded. Boom. A violent explosion suddenly blew up all the cars within a radius of more than 10 meters. The bodyguards near Chen Shui didn't even have time to react. The whole Mercedes-Benz burned fiercely in an instant. Chen Shui and the two boys let out a scream of extreme terror. The fire was raging. The super high temperature instantly melted the car and the people in it. Yuzhou, Hidden Dragon Sea. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan with a solemn face. What termination plan? He asked slowly. It's the termination plan. Li Tianlan said casually, it's an old trick. It's not new at all. If Chen Fangqing can play, I can play, and the Wang family of Beihai can also play. Let's play together. Do you think Chen Fangqing can take it? Li Huaqing took a deep breath, thinking about what might happen. He had a splitting headache. There are many ways to get back at him. There's no need, Li Tianlan interrupted Li Huaqing directly. I like it directly. He said slowly and took out his mobile phone. There was an unread text message on the mobile phone. The text message was an address. Li Tianlan smiled, reached out his hand, and gently flicked a snowflake in front of him. The tiny snowflake was completely broken in an instant. Li Huaqing heard an extremely sharp sound of the wind. Li Huaqing suddenly remembered that when he saw Li Tianlan today, he didn't see Li Tianlan's invincible sword, nor did he see the black windbreaker that should have been on him. Cabinet office. A middle-aged woman in her 40s slowly walked down the steps. Deputy Director Yuan personally sent her out and was saying something with a smile. The middle-aged woman's attitude was reserved and casual. She nodded slightly, looked at the snowflakes in the air, and whispered, "This snow is really clean." Deputy Director Yuan nodded and wanted to say something in agreement. But he opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The steps in front of the office seemed to become quiet for a moment. It was dead silent. Deputy Director Yuan froze and opened his mouth again. He wanted to speak, but there was no way to transmit any sound at all. An incomparably sharp sound of wind rang in his ears, tearing through space and tearing apart heaven and earth. The snowflakes in the sky gathered wildly in front of him and turned into a somewhat illusory figure. The middle-aged woman opened her mouth in horror and could not make any sound. The shadow condensed in the air and directly covered the middle-aged woman. Ah! A short scream sounded in an instant. In front of Deputy Director Yuan, the illusory figure shattered again. In an instant, countless snowflakes passed through the middle-aged woman's body. A large amount of blood suddenly dyed the snow in front of the office. Chapter 885. What are you doing? Li Huaqing suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. Li Tianlan was standing beside him, but his mind was full of the sound of wind that Li Tianlan had just flicked his fingers. It was fierce and austere, which seemed to penetrate the whole city. I'm chatting with you. Li Tianlan smiled. But now there's nothing to talk about. Li Huaqing stared at Li Tianlan closely. He always felt that things would not be so simple, but he didn't know what was wrong. Suddenly, the phone rang. Li Huaqing's expression tightened. He subconsciously took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. It was Ma Si. The ominous premonition in his heart grew stronger and stronger. He took a deep breath and answered the phone. President, something's wrong. Ma Si's voice came from the phone, and his tone was a little distorted. It was a very complicated tone, which included shock, fear, excitement, worry, and disbelief. Li Huaqing had a headache. He glanced at Li Tianlan, who was still standing beside him calmly, and said in a low voice, "Speak." Half an hour ago, Chen Li, the chairman of the Haoyue Group, was involved in a major car accident on his way to Deep Sea Airport and died on the spot. 25 minutes ago, the car of the Prime Minister's granddaughter, Chen Shui, exploded. It seemed to be an accident caused by the spontaneous combustion of the car. The fire was very fierce. Chen Shui was in the car and couldn't escape. Li Huaqing's body shook violently. 5 minutes ago, Ma Si's voice continued, Miss Chen Lijuan was killed in front of the cabinet office. There was no murderer at the scene. According to Deputy Director Yuan, Ms. Chen was pierced by a snowstorm and riddled with holes. Li Huaqing's arm trembled slightly. The Haoyue Group had been jokingly called Chen Fangqing's cash cow. The chairman, Chen Li, was Chen Fangqing's nephew. Half an hour ago he died. In recent years, Chen Shui was also famous in the young circle of Yuzhou and Hui. Although the eldest daughter of the younger generation of the Chen family was absurd, she was deeply doted on by Chen Fangqing. It could even be said that she was Chen Fangqing's favorite granddaughter. 20 minutes ago, she also died. Chen Lijuan, Chen Fangqing's second daughter, was the chairman and general manager of a large state-owned investment group in the southwest of Zhongzhou State. She enjoyed the treatment of a governor. In a small circle of the prince group with Chen Fangqing as the core, Chen Lijuan's identity was extremely sensitive. 5 minutes ago, she also died. Pierced by the wind and snow? Li Huaqing felt the wind and snow falling on his body and cursed in his heart. What kind of messy cause of death was this? His phone kept ringing. Li Huaqing hung up and looked at the phone screen. Countless notifications popped up at the same time. Major search engines, social media apps, and news websites in Zhongzhou State began to push the news almost at the same time. At 10:40 a.m., Haoyue Group's chairman, Qin Li, passed away in a car accident. For details, click. Chen Lijuan's murder happened too quickly. Chen Shui's matter seemed relatively simple. The death wish of the Haoyue Group's chairman, Qin Li, had undoubtedly become a breakthrough point. Looking at this message, Li Huaqing felt like he was looking at an extremely dangerous storm that could devour everything. There was no doubt that this was Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao's counterattack. Precise, ruthless, and brutal. In a situation where no one was prepared, that storm blew up from the Haoyue Group, bringing with it a touch of ferocity that everyone could feel. Li Huaqing suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Did you do it? Li Tianlan was also looking down at his phone. The Giant Group and the Southeast Group joined hands, so the resources they could use were unimaginable. Countless media outlets were crazily pushing the news of Chen Li's death. This was indeed a counterattack. But it was just the beginning of the counterattack. In the next short period of time, countless news about the Haoyue Group would be exposed in the form of blockbuster bombs. And this was also a beginning. Li Tianlan put his phone back in his pocket, smiled, and said slowly, "I'm here. Chen Li died in Shanghai City, thousands of kilometers away. Do you really think I'm an immortal?" "I'm not talking about Chen Li." Li Huaqing stared at him closely. He could be sure that Chen Li's death was not done by Li Tianlan. That was not Li Tianlan's style. What was Li Tianlan's style? It was blatant. For example, he would destroy the Tang family and slaughter the Qi family. He would not hide it at all. Chen Li's car accident and Chen Shui's death were perfectly arranged. It was the kind of perfection that no one could find any clues at all. This was clearly the style of the Wang family of Beihai, or Wang Xingxiao's style after losing Wang Tianzong. Chen Lijuan's death was completely different. The wind and snow pierced into the body? As long as anyone was not stupid, they could basically guess that it was sword energy. In the Desert War, Li Tianlan had fully demonstrated the ability to kill people from a distance. Everyone would suspect Li Tianlan and even believe that it was done by Li Tianlan. "Is it you or not?" Li Huaqing growled in a low voice. The smile on Li Tianlan's face faded little by little. He looked at Li Huaqing and said expressionlessly, "If I hadn't investigated Chen Lijuan clearly, I would even think that she was your daughter." Li Huaqing's momentum stagnated. "You're supporting me now." Li Tianlan stared into Li Huaqing's eyes, and his voice was strong and cold. "Is this your way of revenge?" Li Huaqing sneered. "This is just the beginning." Li Tianlan said lightly, "What I said is that I will support you." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he spoke in a low voice. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He found this sentence very interesting, and it was also very suitable for his current needs. Li Huaqing would support Li Tianlan. But it did not mean that he supported Li Tianlan now. Was he still leaving some leeway? Waiting for the result of the final battle in Beihai? Was there still hope for Chen Fangqing? Li Tianlan smiled. Then he said calmly, "This is your style. How to support you is something I need to consider. Tianlan, remember your identity. You are from Zhongzhou State and the biggest reliance of Zhongzhou State in the next few decades in the dark world. After all, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. His family should be protected. Don't break the rules, otherwise..." Are you threatening me? Li Tianlan interrupted Li Huaqing's words and laughed strangely. Li Huaqing frowned. This is not a threat. The rules, what are the rules? Tell me what rules. He took a step forward and approached Li Huaqing. When the plan termination was launched, who told Qin Fangqing the rules? When the plan was exposed, who told Qin Fangqing the rules? When the blockade was carried out and more than 1,000 soldiers of Emperor Dong's palace died in the desert, where were the rules? So you tell me, damn it? What? Rules? Li Huaqing did not move. Looking at Li Tianlan's eyes that were almost spitting fire, he did not give in at all. I also told the Prime Minister this. Don't break the rules. Li Tianlan nodded and took a step back. But obviously he didn't listen. What a coincidence. Now I don't listen to what the rules are and how others treat me. That's how I treat others. What are the rules? In this matter, Li Tianlan suddenly turned his head. In the wind and snow, Qin Fangqing's figure appeared in the distance. Li Tianlan smiled. He tugged and said in a cold voice, I am the rules. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and did not speak. He turned his head and also looked at Qin Fangqing, who was rushing from a distance. There was no image. It seemed that because he was in a hurry to go out, Qin Fangqing did not even have time to put on a coat. He was wearing a thin white shirt, and his hair was messy because of the wind and snow. His majestic face was no longer serious, but with unconcealed anger and killing intent. He strode in front of Li Tianlan and did not even look at Li Huaqing. Li Tianlan did not move and looked at him quietly. He looked at the culprit who almost destroyed Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Fangqing reached out and grabbed Li Tianlan's collar. His movement was powerful and manic, and his arms were shaking violently. Qin Fangqing pushed Li Tianlan against a tree. The trees shook. Countless snowflakes fell down. Did you do it? Tell me, did you do it? His eyes were red, and he stared at Li Tianlan like a beast that had lost its mind. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Countless snowflakes fell through the treetops, landing on Qin Fangqing's body and his arms. The falling snowflakes were like swords. Blood appeared on Qin Fangqing's palms instantly. Those wounds were so small that no one could see them at all. But the tiny wounds accumulated to a terrifying number in an instant. Tiny drops of blood gushed out of Qin Fangqing's palms. The falling snow pierced into Qin Fangqing's sleeves, arms, chest, and back. In an instant, Qin Fangqing's upper body was covered with blood. Dark red blood stained his white shirt. It was a ghastly sight. Li Huaqing's face changed dramatically and he said angrily, Li Tianlan, do you know what you are doing? The snow was still falling. There were more and more bloodstains on Qin Fangqing's body. Li Huaqing's eyes became completely cold. If the Southeast Group and the Prince Group severely damaged Qin Fangqing's allies in the final battle of Beihai, he did not mind supporting Li Tianlan and re-establishing a balance. But the premise was that Li Tianlan was rational enough. But now Li Tianlan was obviously crazy. Qin Fangqing's nephew, daughter, and granddaughter were all dead. But now Li Tianlan dared to attack Qin Fangqing directly. This kind of reckless madness would inevitably lead to severe punishment by Zhongzhou state regardless of the consequences. If he really dared to kill Qin Fangqing here, Li Huaqing would make Li Tianlan pay the price anyway. It was about the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou state, and then no one could protect him. Qin Fangqing did not seem to feel the pain at all. Blood spread all over his body. He felt the small wounds on his body. The wind and snow pierced into his body with blood, and the wounds kept spreading. It was like his daughter's death in front of the Office of Official Affairs. There were thousands and tens of thousands of wounds. It's really you? It's really you. Qin Fangqing clutched Li Tianlan's collar tightly, and his eyes became more and more ferocious. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The wind and snow were still falling. It fell on Qin Fangqing. But the sword intent in the wind and snow had disappeared without a trace. Li Tianlan was expressionless, but his eyes were full of mockery. He did not intend to kill Qin Fangqing. Even if he was really crazy, he would not dare to do so. But he made countless wounds on Qin Fangqing that were exactly the same as those on Qin Lijuan. It was like he was proving something. This was Li Tianlan's style. It was a flagrant and domineering style. "Let go." He looked at Chen Fangqing and said mockingly, "Do you want to die?" Chapter 886. Chen Fangqing's family was not prominent, but it was not grassroots either. His family background was neither high nor low. From childhood to adulthood, he went all the way from the grassroots to the position of prime minister. In this life, he had encountered many threats. But no one had ever asked him if he wanted to die. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and indifferent. That touch of mockery flashed in his pupils, and then it turned into a faint but extremely real killing intent. Chen Fangqing trembled all over, and it could even be said that he was trembling all over. It was not fear. It was extreme anger. His eyes were red, and he said word by word, "Do you dare to kill me?" He grabbed Li Tianlan's collar tightly and sneered, "Come on, kill me. I want to die now. Come and kill me. You don't have to be in such a hurry to die." Li Tianlan said seriously. The snow in the air swirled wildly. The whistling wind surrounded Li Tianlan with snowflakes. Chen Fangqing's body was directly blown away by the wind and snow, and he staggered back a few meters. Li Tianlan reached out to straighten some wrinkles in his collar, lowered his head, and said slowly, "You have to live before your family dies. You have to live before you have nothing." Chen Fangqing stared at Li Tianlan, and he was furious. "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" Chen Fangqing suddenly turned his head to look at Li Huaqing and roared, "You heard what he said, and you know what he is doing. He is unscrupulous and lawless. What good is it for Zhongzhou State to keep this scourge alive? Kill him. You must kill him." Li Huaqing silently looked at the old man with a ferocious face and did not speak. Now Chen Fangqing was irrational and would not listen to anything. Now Li Tianlan was also irrational, and he wouldn't listen to anything. Li Huaqing was the president. But the president could not do whatever he wanted. At least for now, he could not do anything. Perhaps Chen Fangqing's biggest mistake was not realizing Li Tianlan's identity. Or it could be said that he realized it but did not want to admit it. In fact, they were all the same. Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, Dong Qingwudi, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace. They were all the same. What a person could do depended on his position. What was the difference between Li Tianlan, who had the full support of the giant group and the southeast group, Li Huaqing, who had the full support of the academics, and Chen Fangqing, who had the support of the prince group? Identity? If identity could determine everything, Li Huaqing would be the president, and there would be no 6 groups in Zhongzhou State now. If identity could determine everything, there should be only 1 academics in the entire Zhongzhou State now. On the stage of power, from the top to the bottom, no one cared about who was more senior, who was older, or who had more experience. It was all fake. Everyone only cared about one thing. Whoever had the final say was the boss. Now, Li Tianlan's every word undoubtedly counted in the giant group and the southeast group. Therefore, Chen Fangqing launched the termination plan and the desert war. Now that Li Tianlan had come out, he naturally had the right to retaliate. That might not make sense, but it was very fair. Chen Fangqing was still roaring. The death of his nephew, the death of his granddaughter, the death of his daughter. The continuous bad news caused his rationality to completely collapse. Now, he was like a beast choosing its prey to devour. Suddenly, there was some pity in Li Huaqing's eyes. He was almost sure that at this point, Chen Fangqing had already forgotten their original intention of starting this game. Take down the Wang family of Beihai, eliminate the huge influence of Beihai on Zhongzhou State, make the power of the parliament more centralized, make the road of Zhongzhou State more stable, make the future of Zhongzhou State more brilliant, and let the whole country embark on a more correct path. Obviously, Chen Fangqing had forgotten everything now. The exposure of the termination plan turned the whole game into a war. In the Desert War, more than 1,000 elites of Emperor Dong's palace died, which made the whole thing completely become a personal grudge. Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace, and Chen Fangqing's personal grudge. Personal grudge. Personal grudge. The style of things suddenly lowered to such an extent. They were all figures standing at the peak of power. How could Li Huaqing intervene in the personal grudge between them? That might be the intention of Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai. The original intention of the parliament, the general trend of Zhongzhou state, the future of the country, and the direction of the world. All of this was too heavy, so heavy that countless people in Zhongzhou state could not help but agree with it. Li Tianlan was too young. Wang Shengshao was too young. They were not willing to bear these, because it meant sacrificing their own interests and even their lives. Therefore, the death of 3 people related to Qin Fangqing in a row angered Qin Fangqing, and he quietly turned the so-called game into a personal grudge. This kind of means was not presentable, but after lowering the level, it was easier for others in Zhongzhou state to accept. Li Huaqing knew very well that the most important thing was his attitude. He said he could support Li Tianlan because he was qualified. But the premise was that they solved this so-called personal grudge. Li Huaqing looked at Qin Fangqing silently and said nothing. Qin Fangqing finally understood something. He looked at Li Huaqing and then at Li Tianlan and sneered. So, you choose to support him, right? He looked at Li Huaqing and asked. I'm only responsible for Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing's voice was slow but firm. I won't intervene in your personal grudges. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said nothing. This was the fairest way. Li Huaqing did not intervene in the Desert War, nor would he intervene in Li Tianlan's subsequent revenge. From another perspective, this was equivalent to acquiescence. After all, Li Huaqing was the president. He represented Zhongzhou state and would not intervene in this so-called personal grudge. That was to say, what Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai did not break the rules of Zhongzhou state. Qin Fangqing's body stiffened and he was silent for a long time. He was not angry at Li Huaqing's choice. All this was destined from the moment he decided to launch the Desert War, so he had enough psychological preparation. I see. Qin Fangqing took a deep look at Li Huaqing, and his tone was a little cold. Next, it's a matter between us. He stared into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, Our business has just begun. I'm still young, and I have plenty of time to play with you. Li Tianlan's tone was a little gloomy. Qin Fangqing nodded and seemed to calm down. Everything I did was for Zhongzhou state. I owe you for the termination plan, but mainly for the Wang family of Beihai. If Emperor Dong's palace didn't move, everything in the desert would not have happened. He said slowly and closed his eyes. Wang Yuetong is my woman. Li Tianlan said blandly, You should be glad that you didn't find her. She's just a woman. Qin Fangqing was a little angry. Everything I did was for Zhongzhou state. What's the big deal about sacrificing a woman? It's nothing. Li Tianlan said casually, Everything I did was for Zhongzhou state. What's the big deal about killing your whole family? As he spoke, he chuckled softly. The woman you sacrificed is my woman. If you're really as noble as you say, why don't you sacrifice your wife? Sacrifice your daughter? Sacrifice your mother? Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said calmly, I'll go to them, one by one. The Qin family in the southwest, as long as they have a little relationship with you, none of them will survive. In the future, I will play my role in Zhongzhou state and contribute my strength to Zhongzhou state. With Emperor Dong's palace, Zhongzhou state will only be more glorious than it is now. So, for Zhongzhou state, please kill your whole family. You! Qin Fangqing pointed at Li Tianlan, his arm trembling violently. It's good that we've made it clear. From the perspective of your so-called big picture, you have your reasons and I have mine. If you don't want to hear enough, I can make up 100 reasons to let you die. But even if I make up 10,000 reasons, are you willing to die? So, none of these matters, is it? His voice was cold and calm. Qin Fangqing took a deep breath and pointed at Li Tianlan, unable to speak. Li Tianlan slowly turned around and looked at the hidden sea under the flying snow. He said quietly, The important thing is that now, you're my enemy, and I won't stop until you die. The bodies of Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing shook violently and obviously at the same time. After Wang Tianzong's silence for 2 years, they finally heard the self-name that they disliked very much again. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan in his 20s. Where did his confidence come from? Go back. Just wait for me to kill you. Li Tianlan said softly. Puff! The corner of Qin Fengqing's mouth moved. He seemed to want to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, a mouthful of blood suddenly spurted out of his mouth. Fresh blood fell on the snow-covered ground. It was a ghastly sight. Qin Fengqing, whose upper body was full of fine wounds, shook and looked at Li Tianlan unwillingly. His body slowly fell down. Li Tianlan frowned but did not move. Li Huaqing held Qin Fengqing's body. Prime Minister, calm down, relax, don't get excited. Qin Fengqing's eyelids twitched and slowly closed. Li Huaqing had no time to say anything to Li Tianlan and waved to someone not far away. Ma Si, who had been following behind, trotted over, carried Qin Fengqing on her back, and rushed to Qin Fengqing's residence. Li Huaqing took out his mobile phone and began to make a call. He nodded to Li Tianlan and followed. Li Tianlan stood where he was and looked at Qin Fengqing's limp body with no expression. Li Tianlan could feel the rise and fall of his heartbeat. Qin Fengqing did not die. He was not in a coma. He pretended to be in a coma. There were many effects of pretending to be in a coma. Not to mention what the outside world would think of Li Tianlan after the matter here was spread out. At least some of the dissenting voices in the prince group that had begun to appear recently would stop temporarily. United against a common enemy? Li Tianlan sneered and muttered to himself, "It's a little interesting." Outside Qin Fengqing's office, the guards rushed to Qin Fengqing the moment they saw Ma Si. Li Huaqing and Qin Fengqing's private doctors rushed over in a hurry. Looking at the blood on his body and the corner of his mouth, the two top doctors turned pale. There was no need to stop the bleeding. The countless wounds on Qin Fengqing's upper body were too small and had now healed automatically. The doctors were busy taking blood pressure and heart rate. The guards wanted to contact the hospital but were stopped by Qin Fengqing's private doctor. The doctor fed Qin Fengqing some medicine and was relieved when Qin Fengqing calmed down a little. Yuan Lin, the deputy director of the Office of Public Affairs, who had gone to the Office of Public Affairs to deal with some official affairs, had rushed back as soon as possible. Seeing this scene, he wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and politely sent everyone out. Li Huaqing and Ma Si did not say much and left with the private doctors. On the way back, Li Huaqing glanced at Hidden Si. The young man who called himself the emperor had disappeared without a trace. He shook his head and sighed. Behind the huge office was a small, exquisite courtyard. Behind the courtyard was a small wooden building that was decorated generously and comfortably. In the spacious bedroom, Qin Fengqing was lying on the bed, eyes closed and motionless. Qin Fengqing's secretary, Yuan Lin, sighed and stood up, wanting to go out to get a basin of water to wipe Qin Fengqing's forehead. A hand reached out and suddenly grasped Yuan Lin's wrist. Yuan Lin was slightly shocked and turned around subconsciously. He said in surprise, "Prime Minister." "Little Yuan, go and do one thing." Qin Fengqing closed his eyes and did not open them. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Go ahead." Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said respectfully, "Get in touch with someone." Qin Fengqing said softly. Yuan Lin nodded and approached Qin Fengqing, asking in a low voice, "Who?" Chapter 887. The Western restaurant near the top floor of the hotel was spacious and quiet. The red bean cake, steak, and ice cream here were all famous in Yuzhou. But it seemed that because of the heavy snow, the flow of customers was much less than usual. The sky in Yuzhou was very cold. However, burning gazes kept converging in the Western restaurant. Most of the eyes came from the guests in all corners of the restaurant and the waiters shuttling in the restaurant. Everyone's eyes would inadvertently sweep over a position near the window of the restaurant, then quickly shift their eyes, and then shift again. Qin Weibai sat there, like a dreamy and dazzling scenery. Her dark green dress outlined her slender and perfect figure, and her long hair casually spread out. Her sitting posture was elegant and quiet, and her exquisite and perfect face seemed to have been moisturized last night. There was still a slight blush on it, and it was tender and beautiful and flawless. Quiet, cold, lazy, noble and calm. Different people had different beauty in their eyes. This was a stunning young woman who could satisfy all the perfect fantasies of all men. It was a scenery, a dream, and a bright light that could hardly be looked at directly. Most people were secretly watching her. It was not that no one was shameless enough to strike up a conversation with her because of their so-called wealth, but no one could get within 5 meters of this dreamy young woman. A tall European woman exuding a wild charm stood behind her, standing 2 meters away from her. Anyone who tried to get close to her was blocked by this European woman. When she didn't need to move, she stood quietly behind the young woman, focused and almost devout, like a statue. Is everything normal in South America? Qin Weibai took a small bite of the cake, subconsciously licked the cream on her lips, narrowed her eyes, and seemed to be a little excited. Everything is normal. Horsewoman, who rushed back to Yuzhou from the headquarters of the Lin clan, said softly, "So far, the Jiang family of South America has made no other moves." Qin Weibai tapped her red lips with the silver spoon used to dig the cake in her hand and whispered, "It should be soon. Everything has been arranged according to your previous instructions. There will be no accidents." Qin Weibai said and ate the cake carefully. From Lin Fengting to Qin Weibai, the two patriarchs of the Lin clan had always done a good job in hiding from the world. The headquarters of the Lin clan and even most of its branches were far away from the countless storms of the dark world. But specifically speaking, the branch of the Lin clan in South America was now the focus of the whole clan. The Jiang family of South America intended to target the Wang family of Beihai. It was impossible for them not to consider the attitude of the Lin clan, or rather Lin Fengting. After all, he was now recognized as the #1 expert in the dark world. The Jiang family of South America didn't dare to start a war with the Lin clan. Even in their heyday, they didn't have the guts. But it was not a problem to put on a show and drag the Lin clan's attention to the branch in South America. Only when they were sure that Lin Fengting wouldn't intervene in the decisive battle in Beihai could they act without scruples. The phone screen was still lit up. The push notifications from the various apps on the phone almost never stopped. All the media were focusing on reporting the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group in a car accident. This was not the same as the previous push. It was the second wave. A large number of people had already begun to analyze the cause of death of the chairman of Haoyue Group. Qin Weibai casually flipped through her phone, her crystal-clear eyes calm and indifferent. The heat was on in the dining room. However, the temperature dropped a little without a change in expression. Wisps of faintly discernible sharp sword intent surrounded the entire restaurant. 2 middle-aged men came in. Qin Weibai glanced at them. "Boss." Saint and military counselors spoke at the same time. Without black cloaks or hiding their whereabouts, both of them were dressed in casual clothes. Under the gaze of countless people in Yuzhou, they came to Qin Weibai. Military counselor's smile was easygoing and vague. He stood with the saint. His own force field and Saint's sword intent merged with each other and enveloped his body. No one could see military counselor's appearance clearly. "Sit down." Qin Weibai nodded. "Want to eat something?" Military counselor, who rushed to Yuzhou overnight, didn't stand on ceremony. He took the menu from the waiter and ordered some food, while Saint asked for a glass of water. "How's the preparation going?" Qin Weibai had a small appetite. She only ate half of the cake and pushed it aside. She picked up a napkin and wiped the corners of her mouth, asking casually, "I've convinced all the people who should be convinced. There won't be any problem. Now it seems that the academics' determination is greater than we thought. When I was in the car just now, Deputy Minister Hua Jingyang called me. He reacted very quickly." Military counselor chuckled. Qin Weibai raised her eyebrows and seemed a little surprised. "Haoyue?" Military counselor nodded with a smile. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and smiled. "It's a good entry point. But the plan of the Wang family of Beihai is like a wedding dress for you. Zhongzhou State can't go to the Wang family of Beihai at this time. I can say that I'm their best choice." Military counselor smiled. "And the worst choice? If they know that you're military counselor, their expressions will be wonderful." Saint said lightly. Military counselor's identity was very sensitive to the outside world. It was even more so for Zhongzhou State. In fact, From the very beginning of his rise in Zhongzhou state, all the groups had been trying to win him over. Military Counselor had never made a clear statement to any party. He did not reject or get close to any of them. He had maintained a relatively good relationship with the Big Six. Over the years, no one had been able to rope him in, but he had secretly roped in many people from the Big Six. It doesn't matter. Military Counselor's smile faded a little and he said softly, I'm ready, so the big fish is ours. I eat the meat, and the Wang family of Beihai can at least drink the soup. But in the end, even if Hao Yue can eat all of it, it won't have a big impact. The important thing is Hua Xingyang. This person has been a little too active these days. Among the 9 directors of Zhongzhou State, Hua Xingyang was relatively young. He could be said to be the youngest group of people, about the same age as Dongqing Wudi. After being the deputy minister for 1 term, his ability had been affirmed, and his prestige and qualifications were enough. When Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing cooperated before, Hua Xingyang's performance was not very obvious. Although he did take action, he also restrained his actions. Now that Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing parted ways, all of Hua Xingyang's intentions were completely exposed. What he wanted to fight for was the position of the head of the cabinet, from the deputy minister to the real prime minister. If there were no games between Zhongzhou State and Beihai, if there were no so many accidents, the position of prime minister should have been Wen Siyuan, the speaker of Beihai province. But now Beihai was in chaos, and Qin Fangqing was destined to retire. After Li Huaqing was confirmed to be re-elected, the position of the head of the cabinet, which had not been clearly owned, became a position that all parties were determined to get. Hua Xingyang could be said to be unique in his current position, and he had a great chance of getting the position. Li Huaqing would definitely fully support Hua Xingyang. Even for him, Qin Fangqing had suffered a great loss. After the Prince Group suffered a great loss, Li Huaqing hoped to see the emergence of an extremely powerful academics. At that time, the academics would occupy the positions of president and prime minister, and they would be able to better control the overall situation. This kind of extremely strong situation was absolutely not what he wanted to see, because it also meant that under the strength of the academics, any emerging group would struggle. Qin Weibai thought about it and shook her head. Don't worry, Tianlan will handle it. Military Counselor nodded and did not say much. The core framework still needs 1 core. Have you communicated with the giant group? Qin Weibai asked. Military Counselor wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He glanced at Saint. Saint's expression was a little strange. Let the palace master communicate with the minister and the Bai family about this matter. Not to mention me, who in the whole Zhongzhou state dares to hit on Dongqing Wudi's wife. Qin Weibai smiled slightly. Well, it's better for Tianlan to go. Bai Qingqian will agree, and so will Dongqing Wudi. He should be very clear that a new group is much better than letting Tianlan take over the giant group. In the core structure of the new group, the current deputy prime minister, Wu Jingmin, was undoubtedly the core. Li Tianlan would concentrate all his efforts to push Wu Jingmin to the position of director. The position of prime minister was very difficult, and the position of deputy prime minister seemed to be the best now. The positions of counselor and deputy prime minister left by Wu Jingmin were the second core of the new group. At present, there were limited candidates for this position. There were even fewer candidates who could be trusted, had enough ability, and could continue to maintain close ties with the giant group. The best candidate was undoubtedly Bai Qingqian. Regardless of qualifications or ability, she was qualified to be a counselor. The third core was Zhou Yuanshan, the speaker of Jiangxia. Wu Jingmin, Bai Qingqian, Zhou Yuanshan. These 3 people were enough to plan the future of the new group for at least 20 years. The peak period of the new group would also be when Zhou Yuanshan reached the top 20 years later. The Dongqing clan had unconditionally supported Li Tianlan. With the addition of Bai Qingqian and Zhou Yuanshan, the core personnel of the 3 pillars of the giant group would enter the new group. This would also make it more convenient for the new group to absorb talents from the giant group, but it would not take over the system of the giant group. Everything was for the best. Indeed, the giant group is too loose. Although the cohesion has increased after the reshuffle, in the end, The main departments of the giant group are still the giants from all over Zhongzhou State. Each of them has different interests. If the palace master wants to control the giant group in the future, he will inevitably waste too much energy. It's better to turn the power in his hands into a new group. Qin Weibai turned to look at the wind and snow outside the window. The wind and snow swept through Yuzhou, covering the sky and covering the earth. There is less than a year left. She whispered to herself. The vigorous new group, Emperor Dong's palace that ruled the world, and Li Tianlan who was invincible in the world. All of this will become a reality in less than a year. It was no longer a plan. It was reality. Take down Chen Fangqing and disrupt the decisive battle in Beihai that he pushed at all costs. All of this was within his reach. Keep a close eye on Beihai. Qin Weibai whispered, "Do you have any exact news about those invincible realm experts?" Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurasumi have returned to East Island. Military counselor said calmly, "The dark forces of East Island have been very active recently. They seem to have put a lot of effort into it. Wang Xiaoyao has also returned to Eastern Europe. He should be keeping an eye on Sai City at the border of Snow Country. Sidu Tsangyue is stalled. All signs show that there must be a core behind the Jiang family of South America, East Island, Wang Xiaoyao, and the Vatican. In this alliance, there must be someone playing a position similar to the leader. But we have no clue who this person is. If this person really exists, he may cause us big trouble. It's nothing more than another version of Samsara Palace." Qin Weibai whispered, "It's just that he is more tolerant than the palace master. And his purpose is more complicated." "Boss, do you know who he is?" Saint raised his eyebrows. Qin Weibai hesitated and whispered, "I have a guess, but I'm not sure." A sharp look flashed in Saint's eyes. "Since you have a guess, why don't alert him. You're definitely not his match now. His state is very special. It's probably equivalent to another state of Tianlun." Qin Weibai shook her head. "If so, let His Highness do it in person," military counselor said half a sentence. He paused subconsciously. Qin Weibai looked at him quietly and didn't speak. She wasn't sure who the person hiding in the dark was, but she had some guesses. Similarly, the person hiding in the dark was not sure who Qin Weibai was now, but he would also have some guesses. If Qin Weibai's guess was wrong, it would be a mistake. But if she was right, what would happen? Qin Weibai frowned and whispered, "It's a little troublesome." Military counselor was silent for a while and quietly changed the topic. Jiang Guochu and Moraid's current whereabouts are unknown, but there are no invincible realm killers. There are signs that he seems to have entered Zhongzhou State. Qin Weibai's eyes suddenly froze. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "I'm not very sure. This kind of invincible realm killer is the most difficult to grasp. It's almost impossible to find his trace. What I have now are some vague clues. I'm not even sure if he is in Zhongzhou State." Military counselor said with a bitter smile. Qin Weibai murmured thoughtfully, "If he is really in Zhongzhou State, what's his purpose? Who does he want to kill?" "To kill you," Saint said calmly. "That's the most likely reason. There's another person. At present, he's even more important than me." Qin Weibai said quietly. "Wang Yuetong." Military counselor and Saint looked at each other. Chen Fangqing's termination plan, didn't he give up his evil intentions? They can't find Wang Yuetong. Military counselor said slowly. "Maybe it's because of this that you can't find the Jew." Qin Weibai looked at military counselor meaningfully and said word by word, "Find the Jew and use the method you think is the best." Military counselor smiled bitterly. He knew what Qin Weibai was hinting at. He sighed and shook his head, looking down at the steak that the waiter had just served. The medium-well steak was his favorite, but under Qin Weibai's gaze, the steak in front of him suddenly didn't taste good. The phone rang. Horsewoman standing behind Qin Weibai picked up the phone, handed it to Qin Weibai, and said softly, "It's His Highness." Qin Weibai's eyes softened. She took the phone and glanced at military counselor faintly. Military counselor subconsciously avoided Qin Weibai's eyes. He was so hungry that he completely lost his appetite. "Lemon, have you finished talking?" Qin Weibai answered the phone and smiled softly. "Yes." Li Tianlan's voice sounded a little vague. There was an extremely fierce wind coming from the phone. "I'm going to leave Yuzhou. I'll come back in the evening. I'm going to have dinner with the minister and Aunt Bai." "Where are you going?" Qin Weibai was a little curious. High in the sky, the bustling Yuzhou gradually receded under his feet. The wild wind and snow kept flying in front of Li Tianlan. The black windbreaker on him fluttered unscrupulously in the wind and snow high in the sky. The incomparably complex golden lines completely enveloped Li Tianlan like flames. The city receded under his feet. Li Tianlan went all the way north. He held the phone, narrowed his eyes, and whispered, "Sai City." Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said with some hidden bitterness, "Is it so urgent? I'm still waiting for you to have dinner with me." "It's urgent." Li Tianlan chuckled and said, "Race against time. Someone once killed an invincible realm expert with one shot from 10,000 meters away. Someone once established Heaven Capital with East Island as the foundation. Someone once judged the whole dark world with his own power. There had also been someone who had ended the Supreme Chosen One in the sky above Mormons. It was all in the past. The once magnificent era had passed. In his era, everything. He would do it himself. Chapter 888. Number 16 Qingming Alley, Yuzhou. 2 years ago, for the huge Yuzhou, this was a completely dispensable place. For the past 2 years, this place had always been an extremely awkward place. Today, 2 years later, this place had almost been completely forgotten by people. Number 16 Qingming Alley was not a small place. It was a courtyard house. Although it was a little old, the environment was still passable. In Yuzhou, where the pace of life was so fast that it made people dizzy, this area could be considered a leisurely place. A leisurely area. A group of people who didn't want to wait for death. Therefore, the atmosphere in the courtyard house had always been very strange. The falling snow dyed the courtyard and walls of the courtyard house white. There was a reclining chair in front of the entrance hall of the courtyard house. Lu Qing was lying on the reclining chair, watching the snowflakes slowly fall on his body. His eyes were numb, like a salted fish without a dream. There were people busy in every room of the courtyard house. Searching for information, comparing files, analyzing intelligence. It seemed to be a very busy scene. But in fact, everyone was a little absent-minded. A middle-aged man next to Lu Qing was squatting and smoking. The tobacco fell on the snow with the hot air from his mouth. The middle-aged man shook his head with a depressed expression. "What are we now?" Lu Qing looked at the snowflakes and suddenly laughed at himself. The words of the middle-aged man, who looked extremely depressed, were even more depressing. "The task force? Yes, the task force." Lu Qing nodded and smiled a little strangely. A high position and a great responsibility. The task force sounds quite scary, but what can we investigate? The information in our hands has been turned over. Apart from the information, we have nothing else. The key is that our case has made no progress, but the person involved in the case has already swaggered to Yuzhou. What's the point of our so-called task force? Investigation. The middle-aged man said gloomily. His tone was so honest that it made people cry. Lu Qing seemed to be used to the other party's temper. He shook his head and suddenly said, "I want to leave this place, leave this damn place." In the eyes of Yuzhou, our so-called task force is a joke. We have always been a joke. The middle-aged man sighed and finished a cigarette before lighting another. Lu Qing didn't say anything. It seemed that he had nothing to say to the people around him. The task force had been established for 2 years. He was the third team leader of the task force. After 3 consecutive personnel changes, the task force, which had caused a sensation due to its high standards, had become more and more inconspicuous. The first leader of the task force was Yi Dongxing, councilman rank. The second team leader was Fan Tianyin, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. The rank of a governor. Lu Qing was the third team leader. Before becoming the team leader, he was the Secretary General of the Military Secretary Office. Deputy Governor level. This position could be said to be a direct descendant of the Special Warfare Group. This was also the result of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group's struggle to control the leadership of the task force. And there was only one thing they wanted to investigate. That was to investigate whether Qi Mulin's family, which had been wiped out by Li Tianlan, had committed treason and whether they had colluded with the Burning Legion. After Lu Qing became the leader of the task force, his only job was to prove that Qi Mulin had nothing to do with the Burning Legion. As long as he could prove this, then Li Tianlan's annihilation of the Qi family at that time would be a felony. Regardless of what would happen to Li Tianlan, at least he would have to stay in the desert prison for a few more years. No one could find any evidence of Qi Mulin colluding with the Burning Legion. But no one could find evidence to prove Qi Mulin's innocence. This so-called task force had no direction of investigation at the beginning. Moreover, neither Yi Dongxing nor Fan Tianyin paid much attention to this matter. This matter dragged on for almost 2 years. By the time Lu Qing came over, even if there was any previous evidence, it had been erased without a trace. This position was like a quagmire. Lu Qing was trapped in it on the first day he took office. There was no progress in the whole case since he became the team leader. Lu Qing often felt that he was a joke, and the task force was also a joke. They carried out the so-called investigation every day. Day after day, Lu Qing didn't even know whether the task force was seriously investigating or pretending. And now, the task force was not disbanded. There was no clear conclusion. Li Tianlan came directly to Yuzhou from the desert. He hadn't been in Yuzhou for a long time, but until now, no one in Zhongzhou state had raised any question about it. The existence of the task force seemed to have been completely forgotten. Lu Qing felt that he really seemed to have become a joke. He couldn't find any evidence, and he didn't know how long he would have to suffer in this courtyard house. He lay on the recliner, looking at the snowflakes in the sky, and said with numb eyes, "What do you want to eat for lunch? Instant noodles?" The middle-aged man who was smoking beside him looked depressed. He was different from Lu Qing. Lu Qing served as the team leader of the task force, and the Special Warfare Group had high hopes for him. They hoped that he could find some evidence that could directly hit Li Tianlan. He was shouldering a heavy burden. But with the departure of Yi Dongxing and Qin Fangqing, more and more people didn't take the task force seriously. Now the personnel transferred in were basically players who were not successful in various units. The middle-aged man's name was Li Liang. Before he came to the task force, he was the deputy director of a department of the police department. When he came, he also received a punishment. The others were roughly the same. For them, whether in their original units or in the task force, they were a joke, so it didn't matter where they were. Let's eat hot pot. Lu Qing felt the cold in the air, and his heart was also cold. He was from Shinan City, and at this time, he particularly missed the hot pot in his hometown. "Are you treating?" Li Liang raised his head and glanced at him. "Do you want to drink at noon?" Lu Qing looked a little annoyed. After a moment of silence, he said hoarsely, "Then let's eat instant noodles." Team leader is right. Let's eat hot pot. My treat. A hearty laugh suddenly rang out. A strong and burly figure walked in the door, and his voice was loud. Lu Qing's eyes narrowed and he said lightly, "Director Gua, you're in a good mood." Gua Yu, the director of the intelligence department of the General Staff Department and the first deputy team leader of the task force. Under the situation that the General Staff Department was managed by Yi Dongxing, Gua Yu could be said to be Yi Dongxing's direct confidant. He was not pushed to be the deputy team leader of the task force, but he was here in name only and rarely appeared on weekdays. In other words, he still worked in the General Staff Department. The deputy team leader was a part-time job, and Lu Qing, no part-time job. "Yes, I'm in a good mood." Gua Yu glanced at Lu Qing with a smile. Looking at his salted fish expression, Gua Yu's eyes were a little pitiful. He held the file in his hand and glanced at Lu Qing sympathetically. This team leader still didn't know what the file in his hand meant. "Don't rush to eat, team leader. I have something important to report to you." Gua Yu stopped smiling and said with a serious face. Lu Qing was stunned, and then subconsciously sat up straight. There's progress in the case. Yes. Guiyu nodded. The General Staff Department received some news that there's a major breakthrough in the case. He handed the file in his hand to Lu Qing and looked at him with more and more pity in his eyes. Lu Qing's hands and feet were cold, and his hand holding the file trembled a little. He didn't know what the so-called major breakthrough was. But the breakthrough in the General Staff Department made Guiyu so happy. There was no doubt that this clue was beneficial to the Wang family of Beihai or to Li Tianlan. And the person behind him absolutely didn't want to see this result. Lu Qing took the file and didn't dare to open it for a while. Lu Qing looked at him silently. He looked at his slightly trembling hand holding the file. Lu Qing lowered his head and opened the file little by little. Until this moment, he didn't know that maybe his hands would completely change the current situation of Zhongzhou State. The file was opened little by little. A confession that was obviously just recorded appeared in front of Lu Qing. The content of the confession was very long. There were a few pages of densely written paper. In addition to the confession, there were a few photos. And a small recording device. Lu Qing kept taking deep breaths and flipping through the confession in front of him. The photos were mixed in the paper and appeared in front of him when he flipped through the confession. There was a middle-aged man in the photo. In front of the middle-aged man sat a dignified old man. Lu Qing's heart suddenly jumped. The huge pressure made him a little suffocated for a while. He stared at the photo in front of him and seemed to be a little unbelievable. He trembled and said, "Who is this?" Guiyu knew what he was asking. There were two people in the photo. One of them didn't need to be asked, but the other needed to be explained. He smiled and said in a firm voice, "This person's code name is Black Eagle, a senior staff officer of the Burning Legion, a confidant of Legion Commander Ramelin, and one of the core military counselors of the Burning Legion. The confession is very clear that he was originally from Zhongzhou State, so after the Burning Legion took root in Tianan, he was responsible for all the operations of the Burning Legion in Zhongzhou State." Guiyu's voice was like thunder, rumbling in Lu Qing's ears. In other words, he is the main person in charge of everything of the Burning Legion in Zhongzhou State. Crack. The wooden deck chair suddenly broke. Lu Qing suddenly stood up and stared at Guiyu. His expression was a little frightened, but more incredulous. "You," he kept taking deep breaths and finally roared, "How dare you?" "It's the truth." Guiyu looked at him and said calmly, "The evidence is in your hands." The photo slipped down with Lu Qing's trembling hand and fell on the snow. Li Liang, who was squatting and smoking, glanced at it and subconsciously broke the cigarette between his fingers. Lu Qing took a deep breath and couldn't speak for a while. The task force that had been set up for 2 years had investigated many times, but he never dreamed that there would be such a so-called evidence. To prove that Qi Mulin committed treason? Lu Qing laughed, laughing with incomparable fear. He found that his thinking was still too simple. In the photo, the person facing Black Eagle was not Qi Mulin at all. It was the top leader behind the scenes of the Special Warfare Group. Qi Baitsong, the former director of Zhongzhou State and the executive minister of the army headquarters. If the so-called evidence was spread, it would be a fierce storm that could sweep the whole Zhongzhou State. "You?" Lu Qing's voice was hoarse. "What the hell do you want to do?" Guiyu bent down to pick up the photo and said lightly, "I'm just doing my duty as a member of the task force." Chapter 889. Lu Qing looked down at the confession in his hand. The paper of the confession swayed slightly with the movement of his arm. He only felt that all this was extremely absurd. The confession was very long. The content was detailed and explosive. The man codenamed Black Shadow explained a lot of problems from beginning to end. To be exact, it was a series of cooperation problems between the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Battalion. The target was not Qi Mulin. It was not even Qi Baitsong. It was the whole Special Warfare Group. In the confession, Black Shadow said that the Burning Legion was Ramiro, the commander of the Burning Legion whom Qi Mulin met when he visited Africa. Then the cooperation between the two sides continued to deepen. As Emperor Dong's palace continued to develop and became a threat to Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, personally invited the Burning Legion to Tian'an and asked Ramiro to severely damage Emperor Dong's palace. Then the Burning Legion entered Tian'an and got the support of Annan State. The Burning Legion became a channel of communication between Kunlun City and Annan State. Up to now, the secret cooperation between the three parties had not stopped. In the past 2 years, Kunlun City had secretly leaked countless secrets of Zhongzhou State to the Burning Legion and Annan State. The confession was clear and concise. Even Lu Qing wasn't sure if this was true or not. True or false? It didn't matter. What mattered was that Guiyu had gotten the information through his own channels. In the case that no one could determine the authenticity, the photos, the confession, and these clues had to be handed in. Whether it was true or false, once these things entered the Hidden Dragon Sea, they were destined to cause an extremely violent storm. Lu Qing himself was a member of the Special Warfare Group. He was the patriarch of the task force, and he was destined to be the one to hand in these things. He was standing in the center of the storm. When the wind suddenly rose, he didn't even have the room to resist, and he would be torn to pieces by the storm immediately. Lu Qing raised his head and looked at Guiyu in front of him, his eyes dull. Guiyu looked at him calmly, as if thinking about something. It was snowing heavily. The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became subtle. Guiyu suddenly moved his body and said with a smile, "It is said that the team leader is an expert of the thunder-shocking realm?" Lu Qing said dully, "What do you want to say?" "A little weak." Guiyu chuckled and said, "The intelligence department of the General Staff Department is full of elites. Those who can get to the position of director are at least at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. With the strength of the team leader, if he were in my place, he would at most be a section chief of a department." The corner of Lu Qing's mouth twitched. For a moment, he really wanted to kill him to keep his mouth shut. One Guiyu and a dozen or so idlers who were not welcomed by the various departments. It did not sound difficult. It was indeed not difficult. But the problem was that he was no match for Guiyu. "You caught Black Hawk?" Lu Qing asked in a low voice. "Yes, 3 days ago, we locked onto Black Hawk's whereabouts and captured him on the same day. These days, we have been secretly interrogating him. After getting his confession, I reported the news to General Yi and came here." Guiyu said calmly. Yi Dongxing was a member of Zhongzhou State, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, the chief of the general staff, and also the minister of the intelligence department. He could be said to be Guiyu's immediate superior. The news reached him. No matter what, it was impossible to suppress it. Lu Qing took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, "Where is that shadow now? Is he still in your military intelligence agency?" The General Staff Department should not deal with Black Shadow. So after getting this confession, we informed the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The director of the Special Operations Bureau came in person and took him away when I came. Lu Qing's heart sank slightly. The Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou had always been within the sphere of influence of Kunlun City. After the Burning Legion raided Yuzhou, the former director was suspended and replaced by Drifting Cloud of Sai City. But because most of the people in the Special Operations Bureau were from Kunlun City, Drifting Cloud's work was not smooth. Since Sai City was not peaceful recently, Drifting Cloud resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou and returned to Sai City with Situ Tsangyue. The new director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou was still a member of the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xingyun's confidant, named Gu Ci. The other party dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, which meant that he dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Warfare Group. What did it mean to hand over a witness who could testify that the leader of the Special Warfare Group committed treason to the Special Warfare Group? Was the other party fearless? Or were these confessions all true? Lu Qing's heart suddenly wavered. Once again, he recalled the contents of the confessions. Those contents clearly recorded Black Hawk's contact with Gu Xingyun and Qi Beizong. Some of them were even the original words. Gu Xingyun clearly expressed his uneasiness and irritation about the rise of Emperor Dong's palace. He thought of the cause of the rise of Kunlun City, but Li Tianlun, who had now reached the peak. The hatred was too deep, and there was no possibility of reconciliation. So Gu Xingyun mobilized the Burning Legion to raid Emperor Dong's palace in Tianan? How logical it was. Lu Qing even somewhat believed it himself. After all, the special warfare system was different from others. There were too many dark sides and unseen places in it. The vague rules meant that there were too many means that could be used. And Gu Xingyun was not that kind of person. A man who was waiting for death would do something and could do something when he saw Li Tianlan and the Li family rise from the ashes. Perhaps no one in Zhongzhou state would not believe this. Lu Qing was suddenly shocked and shook his head subconsciously. He actually began to doubt Gu Xingyun in his heart? Doubting his own leader? He took a deep breath, held the document, looked at Guiyu, and was in a dilemma. "Leader, maybe I should remind you," Guiyu said faintly. "General Yi also has a copy of this information at this time, but this is the work of our task force. I think we should take some initiative." Lu Qing's mouth was full of bitterness. The so-called initiative was nothing more than to hand in the information before Yi Dongxing handed it over to the parliament. As a capable general of the Special Warfare Group, he had to hand in the evidence of the group's treason. This feeling was almost the same as the feeling of forcibly destroying oneself in a situation where one was unwilling to do so. But the information was already in his hands, and it was absolutely impossible not to hand it over. The only choice he could make was who to hand over the information first. Lu Qing took a deep breath, clenched the information in his hand, and said in a deep voice, "I see." Guiyu grunted and looked at him, motionless. Lu Qing was a little angry, subconsciously raised his voice, and snorted coldly, "Prepare the car, go to the Hidden Dragon Sea." The car soon stopped at the gate of the courtyard. Lu Qing hurriedly got in the car with the information. The car started. "Go to the Hidden Dragon Sea," Lu Qing said in a low voice. "Slow down, don't worry." The driver responded, and the car slowly left the courtyard. Lu Qing picked up the phone and dialed a number. It was difficult for him to directly contact Gu Xingyun at his level. He was looking for Gu Fengbue, the deputy governor of Kunlun City. "What's the matter?" Gu Fengbue's phone was quickly connected. "Governor." Lu Qing managed to calm down and said in a hoarse voice, "Something is wrong." The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion, and he confessed some problems related to Kunlun City. "I am now on my way to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Yi Dongxing also has a copy of the same information. You'd better tell His Highness to be mentally prepared." Gu Fengbue was silent for a long time and did not speak. Lu Qing's heart became more and more chaotic. From Gu Fengbue's silence, he seemed to have a premonition of the authenticity of the information in his hand. Suddenly, the small amount of information in his hand became more and more hot. "What information?" Gu Fengbue asked. "It's a confession and a few photos." "I'll take them and send them to you," Lu Qing said. Chapter 890. There was a soft light in the almost luxurious study. The curtains were closed. One photo after another appeared on the screen connected to the mobile phone. Obviously, the photos taken by the mobile phone were placed on the screen. The content became a little blurred, but it was still clear. Because the photos were densely packed with words, the screen played very slowly. The photos rolled slowly one by one. The last one changed from words to images. In the photo, Qi Baitsong, the former director of Zhongzhou State, looked gentle and seemed to be saying something to the middle-aged man sitting in front of him. Gu Fengbue, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, sat on one side of the sofa, frowning. Gu Xingyun was facing the screen, watching all this silently, and kept silent for a long time. Yi Dongxing also has the same information, and even the original of this information is in his hands. Lu Qing has no way. I guess this information has now reached the Hidden Dragon Sea. Gu Fengbue said in a deep voice. It's ridiculous. Gu Xingyun twitched the corner of his mouth, and his voice was cold. His words showed enough confidence. Lu Qing was undoubtedly a smart man. So the confession he took with his mobile phone was all the key parts. For example, Black Hawk said that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to enter Tianan to attack Emperor Dong's palace. For example, other things that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to do. For example, the initial contact between the Special Warfare Group and the Burning Legion. It even included some of the contents of the conspiracy between Qi Baitsong and Gu Xingyun when he met them. These contents were indeed detailed enough. But in Gu Xingyun's eyes, everything was absurd to the extreme. Except that the so-called motive was correct. Everything else seemed to be off the mark. The initial contact between the Burning Legion and Kunlun City was not like this at all. As for the conversation between the man with the code name Black Hawk and Qi Baitsong, it had never happened. Black Hawk said that he was the military counselor of the Burning Legion and an important figure in contact with Kunlun City on behalf of the Burning Legion. He had seen Qi Baitsong, Gu Xingyun, and Gu Qianchuan more than once, and they had also planned many things together. But in fact, Gu Xingyun had never seen Black Hawk at all. He had heard of this code name. Within the Burning Legion, Black Hawk was not even a core figure of the Burning Legion. He could barely be regarded as a high-level figure who had touched the surface. Gu Xingyun's expression was a little contemptuous, and he was a little angry in his heart, but he was not flustered. He had been in contact with the Burning Legion for a long time. It was true that Kunlun City was behind the Burning Legion's entry into Tianan. However, Gu Xingyun was absolutely sure that he would not be caught. As for the things that Lu Qing had sent over, in his opinion, they were just child's play. They were the worst kind of framing. It didn't matter whether the leaders of the parliament believed it or not. It was naturally the best if they didn't believe it. Even if they believed it, Gu Xingyun did not panic at all. In the face of the confession sent by Lu Qing, he had 10,000 ways to easily prove the innocence of Kunlun City. A farce. Gu Xingyun shook his head. There's nothing to see. Maybe it's not just a farce. Gu Fengbo lowered his head and said thoughtfully, this may be a warning. Tell me what you think. Gu Xingyun looked at the screen in front of him and said calmly. Li Tianlan has just left the desert prison. It has been less than 24 hours since then, and this information suddenly appeared. What does this mean? Gu Fengbo laughed in a low voice. No matter what, this information is very important. If it can become a reality, it is indeed very important. Gu Xingyun said coldly. Li Tianlan entered the desert prison 2 years ago because he was guilty. The information that could prove Li Tianlan's innocence was extremely important. First of all, Li Tianlan had to get a firm foothold in leaving the prison. Everything that followed, including all of his revenge, could be carried out in a logical manner. Next, if there is no accident, Li Tianlan will pour all his firepower on the Prince Group. At this time, this information is obviously a warning to us not to interfere. If the information in the information, if it's really groundless, it can only prove that from the beginning, the Southeast Group has been suspecting that the Burning Legion has something to do with Kunlun City, but there is no evidence. Now that they have taken out this information, they want us to be overwhelmed. It's hard for you and Minister Qi to fall down, but Qi Mulin must be the scapegoat this time. They want to prove from the Special Warfare Group that Li Tianlan eliminated the Qi family for the sake of the country. At the same time, they want to disgust us and warn us not to support the Prince Group. Gu Fengbo shook his head. Gu Xingyun snorted coldly. Why should Qi Mulin be the scapegoat? I can easily explain the things mentioned in the information. They can't convict me, and Qi Mulin is naturally innocent. Li Tianlan will still have a stain on him. Black Hawk. Gu Fengbo was silent for a while and said in a low voice, no one is sure how much Black Hawk knows. After all, he is a senior of the Burning Legion. Even if what he revealed can't threaten us, he himself is a variable. The Wang family of Beihai made up the so-called evidence crudely and didn't take it seriously. But who knows if they really have something? Even if what they have is far from the truth, it can still cause us great trouble. He picked up the teacup, took a sip, and said in a low voice, in fact, I think Beihai must have something, but now they have no time to care about us. Li Tianlan, Wang Shengshao, everyone is staring at the Prince Group, and we have become secondary. Take this opportunity to clear the suspicion of the Special Warfare Group, push Qi Mulin out, and prove Li Tianlan's innocence. Then this matter will be over. The prince group is obviously more tempting than us now, and, he paused, and his face was a little complicated with fear. As soon as Li Tianlan left the desert, he killed First Elder with one sword strike. If he didn't continue, Li Tianlan could kill Gu Qianchuan in a second, and naturally he could kill Kunlun City. Even if the special warfare group didn't cooperate, Li Tianlan could force Gu Xingyun to bow down. At least under that sword light, Kunlun City was now at a disadvantage in terms of strength and force in the face of Emperor Dong's palace. Now Li Tianlan and Wang Xingshao only wanted to divide the interests of the prince group and didn't care about the special warfare group. But if they were serious, Gu Qianchuan also appeared in the desert, and Li Tianlan had every reason to blame him. Murderous weapon. Gu Xingyun gnashed his teeth. The sword that illuminated the desert night sky spread throughout the dark world as soon as it appeared. All the superpowers came to a relatively unanimous conclusion in the shortest time. That sword light could not be explained from any point of view of martial arts. It set off from Zhongyuan, passed Yan and Zhao, entered Dongshan, flew over Yuzhou, and went straight to Beihai. From Beihai, it passed through Longjiang Province, Suzhou Province, and entered the desert in one day. When the sword light completely lit up, from Beijiang to the desert prison, the sword light drew an arc of more than 100,000 meters. More than 100,000 meters. What did that mean? It was more than 100 kilometers away. At the moment when the sword light lit up, the sword energy had torn the ambitious team, destroyed the armored core, killed Gu Qianchuan in a second, and swallowed the murderous weapon Setting Sunday. During the whole process, all the superpowers in the dark world had the most accurate test. Incredibly fast. From the appearance of the sword light to the death of Gu Qianchuan, it was more than 100 kilometers away. The whole process took 0.7 seconds. What did that mean? 0.7 seconds? No one could spread their sword energy to a distance of more than 100 kilometers in such a short time. The speed far beyond the speed of sound, the unparalleled destructive power, and the almost mythical flying distance all proved one thing. That sword was not Li Tianlan's sword. It was a murderous weapon. It was an unimaginably great power produced by the combination of many murderous weapons. The most terrifying thing was that with the continuous integration of the murderous weapons, the firepower of the murderous weapons seemed to be no longer pouring out at one time. With sufficient energy, Xinyuan Feng had the conditions to use it many times. With Xinyuan Feng's sword in hand, Li Tianlan in this state was even close to Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. He was truly invincible in the world. Kunlun City could not afford to offend such Li Tianlan. To be exact, they could not afford to offend him now. Xinyuan Feng. The only thing they could do was to wait and retreat. The prince group was in a panic. The final battle in Beihai was about to begin. The battle was imminent. Kunlun City and even the entire dark world were looking forward to the day when Xinyuan Feng ran out of energy. Now Li Tianlan might still be terrible without the murderous weapon, but he was definitely not invincible. Gu Xingyun's facial muscles twitched, and he only felt a stuffiness in his heart. Murderous weapon. Murderous weapon again. From the rise of Kunlun City to the present, it had always been stuck in a bottleneck because of the murderous weapon. During the period when the Li family fell, the Wang family of Beihai had Wang Tianzong. With the human emperor in his hand, no one in the dark world could fight against Wang Tianzong. Gu Xingyun managed to get the setting sun for Kunlun City at the cost of serious injury, but from beginning to end he did not even have a chance to fire. Once again, it was swallowed and integrated by Li Tianlan's Xinyuan Feng. Now, in the face of Emperor Dong's palace that was changing every day, he also did not dare to act rashly because of a murderous weapon. What was Li Tianlan without the murderous weapon? What was he? This question was actually not important. The important thing was that Li Tianlan now had a murderous weapon. And it was the strongest murderous weapon in the dark world. Gu Xingyun rubbed his temples and was about to speak. The fax machine in the study suddenly made a harsh sound. Lu Qing had sent all the complete information and photos over. This time, Gu Fengbo looked at the time and said, "Lu Qing has come out of the hidden dragon sea." He took all the information and handed it to Gu Xingyun. "It's all here." Gu Xingyun nodded, took it, and looked at it carefully. The first page of the confession was full of content that seemed to be true but was actually absurd. The second page was probably the same. Gu Xingyun casually threw the first 2 pages aside and turned to the third page. He raised his eyebrows and then frowned tightly. Then the fourth page. The study suddenly became extremely quiet. Gu Xingyun's face began to become more and more gloomy, and even a little frightened. His palm holding the information was trembling slightly. Lu Qing thought that the most important confession he had uploaded at the beginning was completely wrong. Those absurd conversations seemed to be important, but in fact they were meaningless. But the things that Lu Qing did not send at the beginning were the real fatal things. These included the arrangement of the Burning Legion in Tianan after accepting the invitation of Kunlun City, the way to enter Tianan, the channels used, the approximate number of people, and the exchange of interests, and the retreat channel of the Burning Legion after the raid on Yuzhou that day. Gu Xingyun's breathing became more and more rapid. These couldn't be things that Black Hawk could access. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that everything in the confession was true. This was obviously not the intelligence handled by Black Hawk. Why did he know? Gu Xingyun gasped and suddenly threw the information in his hand into the air. Gu Fengbo was startled. When he was about to say something, the red confidential phone in the study suddenly rang. Gu Xingyun's body shook, and his face was a little pale. He moved over little by little and answered the phone. "Xingyun, it's me." On the other end of the phone, Qi Baitsong's low voice sounded. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and answered. "Do you know about Black Hawk?" Qi Baitsong asked. "I just received the information, and I'm still reading it." Gu Xingyun said. "Black Hawk has now been handed over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Do you know about this?" Qi Baitsong's voice was slow and hoarse. "I know." Gu Xingyun nodded. Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was his territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, all the people from the director to the deputy director were his people. Qi Baitsong answered. He was silent for a long time, and then whispered, "Black Hawk is dead. He died less than half an hour after entering the Special Operations Bureau." Gu Xingyun answered. Then he suddenly widened his eyes and his face changed dramatically. Chapter 891. Black Eagle died. He died in Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. The moment he heard the news, Gu Xingyun felt his blood freeze. It was as if he was suddenly covered by a big net. For the Southeast Group, Black Hawk's death was meaningless to them with the mixed and false confession. But for the Special Warfare Group, the death of Black Eagle meant endless trouble. Big trouble. He somehow thought of the resignation of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau Director Drifting Cloud a few days ago. He thought that the General Staff Department would agree to hand Black Eagle over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Then Black Eagle died as soon as he entered Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. All of this seemed like a trap. Drifting Cloud did serve as the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. But everyone knew that it was Gu Xingyun's territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, the new director, Gu Ci, was Gu Xingyun's confidant. The entire Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was made up of the elites of Kunlun City. From the director, the 2 deputy directors, the staff officer, to the middle-level officers, they were all from Kunlun City. So the whole scene looked very clear. The General Staff Department caught Black Eagle of the Burning Legion and found the evidence of treason of Kunlun City and even the leader of the Special Warfare Group. After getting the evidence, the General Staff Department handed over the criminal to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau according to the normal procedure. The criminal with the evidence of treason of the Special Warfare Group entered the territory of the Special Warfare Group. Then he died. Well, it was that simple. What did it mean? As long as they weren't stupid, everyone would think it was to kill him. If everything recorded in the confession was a complete lie, then the death of Black Eagle didn't mean anything. But the problem was that many key clues in the confession were true. Black Eagle shouldn't have touched them, but he knew them and presented them in the confession. Even if those things were carefully handled, it was impossible to leave no clues. The most important thing was that the Burning Legion avoided the route of Yozhou's search from Yuzhou. This kind of thing couldn't be completely cleaned up. And now, the General Staff Department already knew about it, which meant that Yi Dongsheng had some clues. If Gu Xingyun cleaned it up, it would only cause more trouble. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. How did Black Eagle die? He asked in a deep voice while holding the phone. Suicide. Qi Baitsong's voice was hoarse. Gu Ci has already checked his body immediately. There is no sign of poisoning and his mind is normal. This sentence blocked most of the possibilities. Gu Xingyun rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself, "Suicide, do you believe it?" Qi Baitsong asked. Gu Xingyun smiled bitterly. It was not a matter of whether he believed it or not, but whether others would believe it or not. If this matter was not handled well, it would definitely be fatal to the Special Warfare Group. Li Tanlan. Wang Shengshao. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold and he gnashed his teeth. What a big appetite. Qi Baitsong remained silent. Gu Xingyun held the phone and didn't know what to say for a while. Forget about Mu Lin's matter for now. After an unknown period of time, Gu Xingyun said in a low voice. Qi Baitsong took a deep breath on the other end of the phone. Just from this sentence alone, he had already confirmed that not everything in the confession was a false accusation. In other words, Kunlun City and the Burning Legion were really related. Otherwise, even if the death of Black Hawk would make Kunlun City very passive, it was fake after all, and the confession could not cause too much damage to the Special Warfare Group. Qi Baitsong was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "What are you going to do?" The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth twitched fiercely. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Fill their appetite first." It was not until the moment of Black Hawk's death that he understood. This confession was not a warning given to him by Li Tianlan and Wang Shengshao. This confession was a knife. A knife ready to cut the flesh of the Special Warfare Group. If Chen Fangqing lost this game, the Prince Group was bound to suffer an unprecedented blow. With the in-depth investigation of this confession, the status of the Special Warfare Group would inevitably decline again, and its strength would further shrink. How much the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group would lose. How much Li Tianlan and the others would gain. Even if these gains were divided equally, the part Li Tianlan got could barely support the embryonic form of a group. Bang! The red confidential phone was crushed in his hand. Gu Fengbo was startled and subconsciously stood up from the sofa. "My lord, it's okay." Gu Xingyun threw the fragment in his hand to the ground. His eyes flickered and he whispered, "Just bear with him for a year." He took a deep breath and murmured, "Just a year." Golden Autumn Pavilion, Hidden Dragon Sea. The president's office was filled with smoke. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it almost solidified. Only the sound of turning pages echoed occasionally. Although Lu Qing's report had been delayed as much as possible, the information was still handed in. Although he thought his task force was a joke, Zhongzhou State still gave Lu Qing the right to enter the Hidden Dragon Sea at any time to show the importance it attached to this matter. And it was in this office that Lu Qing reported the information in his hand to the three most powerful counselors in Zhongzhou State: President Li Huaqing, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing, and Dongqing Wudi, the Minister of the Army Headquarters. At this moment, the three giants, who were completely supreme in Zhongzhou State, were all looking down at the confession in their hands in silence. After the first time, the three of them looked at it very carefully for the second time. Everyone's brows were tightly furrowed, their faces solemn. Yi Dongsheng sat aside, sipped his tea silently, and watched the three leaders looking through the information in their hands without saying a word. He came a little later than Lu Qing, but he reported the same thing. As an insider, he was also asked to stay. In the crisp sound of the lighter, Dongqing Wudi lit another cigarette and took a deep breath. Yi Dongsheng observed them calmly. As the president, Li Huaqing's emotional ups and downs were the most obvious. The confession was detailed and reasonable, and the logic was extremely clear. Yi Dongsheng could clearly feel his anger. But besides the anger, he also had some doubts. It seemed that he didn't believe the content of the information. At least he didn't believe all of it. Chen Fangqing was also reading the information. It was said that he fainted outside in the morning and suffered some flesh injuries when he met with Li Tianlan. At this time, the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group was already a hot topic. In one morning, Chen Fangqing lost his daughter, nephew, and granddaughter. The huge blow made him unable to recover at all. At this time, he sat here absent-mindedly. Although he also maintained anger, he was more worried and resentful. Yi Dongxing smiled silently. The information in his hand was submitted at the perfect time. The academics had parted ways with the Prince Group. At this time, Chen Fangqing's most powerful ally, the Special Warfare Group, was in trouble. The next counterattack could be completely focused on the Prince Group. That was probably why Chen Fangqing was worried. He looked at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi was calm and expressionless, without any emotion. Yi Dongxing slowly lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and lit it. "What do you think?" In a somewhat ethereal voice, Li Huaqing suddenly raised his head and waved the confession in his hand. He didn't ask Dongqing Wudi, nor did he ask Chen Fangqing. Instead, he looked directly at Yi Dongxing. Yi Dongxing was a little surprised, but then he understood. He could be said to be the first person to come into contact with this confession. At this time, of course, it was reasonable for the president to ask his opinion. "That photo doesn't prove anything," Yi Dongxing said with a smile. Li Huaqing subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Chen Fangqing raised his eyebrows in surprise. There was only one photo. It was the one where Qi Baitsong and Black Hawk met. In fact, as soon as I got the photo, I had already asked the ministry to do an identification. The identification result is very clear. The photo is fake, something that has been synthesized. Yi Dongxing said lightly, "We can't be sure if Black Hawk has met with Minister Qi, but at least there is no proof in the confession." Li Huaqing's body seemed to be a little relaxed. He said calmly, "You mean, this confession is not credible?" "Not really." Yi Dongxing's response was concise and powerful. He paused and continued, "But it is not low. Make it clear." Chen Fangqing said slowly. His headache was getting worse recently. "There are many things in the confession that can't be confirmed for the time being. You need to talk to His Highness Gu Xingyun about this to see what the problem is. But there are some things that the comrades of the Military Intelligence Bureau of the Ministry of Intelligence have launched a preliminary investigation. One thing is certain. When the Burning Legion attacked Yuzhou, someone in the Special Warfare Group did provide them with convenience during the evacuation. This clue is very important. At present, we have secretly controlled several key figures." Yi Dongxing said slowly, "It's just that this case is very sensitive. After knowing this, I have temporarily stopped the investigation. If I continue to investigate, no one knows who will be involved. I hope the Parliament can give me enough authorization and trust, or we can pretend that we don't know that someone in the Special Warfare Group committed treason." Hearing this, not only Chen Fangqing, but also Li Huaqing had no way out. He opened his mouth and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's expression was calm. "Pretend that we don't know? Are we going to let the vermin continue to destroy the good situation? Investigate, we must investigate. No matter who is involved, we must investigate to the end." The corner of Chen Fangqing's mouth twitched, and he did not speak. Li Huaqing's face was as calm as water. He nodded slowly and said, "I agree with Minister Dongqing. We must investigate, and we must investigate it strictly. I need the formal authorization of the Parliament," Yi Dongxing said without looking at Chen Fangqing. Li Huaqing nodded and gestured to Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, "From now on, a special task force will be set up to investigate the problems of the Special Warfare Group. I will be the team leader, and you will be the standing director. You can mobilize the personnel of the Military Intelligence Bureau, the Ministry of Security, the Police Department, various troops, and the Special Operations Bureau everywhere to join the task force. My only requirement is to be fast. We must find out the vermin in the Special Warfare Group as soon as possible." "I understand." Yi Dongxing nodded and glanced at Chen Fangqing. His eyes were full of meaning. Chen Fangqing took a deep breath and rubbed his head, which seemed to be splitting, with a gloomy face. He knew very well. If his daughter's death was just the revenge of Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai against him, then the information in front of him was the beginning of the official counterattack of the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. He had no way out. Chapter 892. Zhongzhou State. Even in the entire Dark World, Sai City could be said to be the most special one among all the forces with Invincible Realm experts. The Wang family of Beihai didn't need to say more. The Li family was also prosperous before it collapsed. After the breakthrough of Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun, Mount Shu had been making continuous moves in the past 2 years and had a stronger and stronger ruling power in the southwest of Zhongzhou State. What was the Invincible Realm? Whether it was the peak of the Invincible Realm or the ordinary Invincible Realm, there was no difference in the eyes of most people in the Dark World. This realm originally represented the peak of the Dark World and the peak of personal strength. Mysterious, majestic, and irresistible. Therefore, every Invincible Realm expert would have his own sphere of influence, his own development foundation, his own right to speak, and a transcendent status that could match his realm. Sai City could be said to be Situ Zhangyue's sphere of influence. But she had almost never developed any force. As for the right to speak, Situ Zhangyue had never expressed any opinion on anything inside Zhongzhou State. The status of the hidden god of Zhongzhou State was indeed transcendent, but most of the time, Situ Zhangyue was transcendent as if she didn't exist. She would only show up occasionally when Zhongzhou State asked her to do something. Over time, most people in Zhongzhou State seemed to have forgotten Sai City. And Sai City also forgot Zhongzhou State. After tribulation broke through, Sai City already had 2 Invincible Realm experts. In terms of high-end strength, Sai City was the second force in Zhongzhou State, second only to the Wang family of Beihai. But even so, Sai City had not developed much in the past few years. This famous city of assassins in the Dark World had always maintained an absolutely aloof and indifferent attitude, as if it had no interest in the outside world. So compared with the forces with Invincible Realm experts, Sai City was the smallest even compared with the large forces in Zhongzhou State. It was far less than Mount Shu. It was far less than Jade Pool. Even Azura Path, which had been suppressed by Sai City these years, had a lot more people than Sai City. There were less than 800 combatants. Cooks, logistics, the families of a few combatants, there were less than 2,000 people in total. This was also the number of permanent residents in Sai City. With less than 800 combatants, it was even less than some medium-sized martial arts forces. Because of this, when the army of Snow Country made abnormal moves on the other side of Mount Taibai, Situ Zhangyue had to return to Sai City from Yuzhou and keep an eye on the situation of Snow Country. The anomaly at the border had started on the day of the lockdown, and it had been more than 24 hours since then. Snow Country mobilized 2 border legions and slowly approached Sai City. There were about 20,000 soldiers in each of the 2 legions. Immediately, some organizations in the Snow Country Special Warfare System began to join the army. So far, Sai City had not collected detailed relevant information, so it could only guard the border of Mount Taibai. The wind was biting cold. The icy wind blew the snow on Mount Taibai. Snow fluttered in the air, and the world was a blur. Zhangyue stood expressionlessly on a hillside, gazing at the Snow Empire military camp in the distance. This was the most typical mountainous environment. The terrain was steep and complex, and the undulating peaks were covered with snow. The harsh terrain formed the border between the 2 countries. Most of the time, the border between the 2 countries did not even need to be guarded by soldiers. This terrain also meant that even if there was a war between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country, it was unlikely that there would be a large-scale battle between soldiers in this area. The snow, the peaks, and the rugged mountain roads were enough to make most infantry powerless. If this place became a battlefield, the most likely outcome would be firepower coverage or airdrop tactics. Situ Zhangyue watched all this silently. Looking at the shining light in the distant military camp, She was silent for a long time. She knew very well what the purpose of the Snow Country Army, which was separated by mountains and snow a few kilometers away, was. She also knew what Zhongzhou State's attitude toward this matter was. The Snow Country Army on the opposite side. To put it bluntly, it was Wang Xiaoyao's force. Wang Xiaoyao was controlling the Dark World and the entire special warfare system of Snow Country step by step. In 2 years, his strength had expanded extremely rapidly. Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei were partners. Wang Qinglei and Chen Fangqing were partners. Obviously, Wang Xiaoyao wanted to use the power of Snow Country to drag her, and even the entire Sai City here. The timing was delicate. The location was also delicate. In such a complex and harsh environment, Zhongzhou State did not have to worry that the army of Snow Country would invade Zhongzhou State. Moreover, there was Wang Xiaoyao's guarantee, which was equal to double insurance. Chen Fangqing also hoped that Situ Cangyue would stay in Sai City, so he would not take any action, nor would he provide them with support. Slight footsteps stepped on the snow on the ground, and he slowly walked behind Situ. "Governor!" Drifting Cloud's voice sounded. Situ Cangyue answered. "I think I understand why Minister Dongqing suggested me to resign a few days ago." Drifting Cloud glanced at the military camp in front and whispered with a smile. Situ Cangyue stared into the distance, took a deep breath, and turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "Something happened to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, and it's big trouble." Zhongzhou State now has the news that the Special Warfare Group has committed treason. The cause of this matter is the General Staff Department. The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion. He confessed a lot of things, and some evidence has been found. The witness was killed when he was handed over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. Drifting Cloud's voice was a little playful. Situ Cangyue was stunned and asked subconsciously, "Silencing him?" "Who knows?" Drifting Cloud lowered his head and whispered, "The General Staff Department should have reported this matter to Minister Dongqing in advance, so the minister asked me to resign. If there is no accident, in the next few days, the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will be replaced. Gu Ci will not end well, and the entire Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will probably be replaced." Situ Cangyue was silent for a while and whispered, "Do you want to go back?" Drifting Cloud, who had resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou a few days ago, looked at her seriously. "I'm waiting for your decision." Situ Cangyue's body stiffened for a moment. She knew very well what Drifting Cloud was talking about. He had said this so-called decision once a few years ago. This was not a decision about Drifting Cloud's position. It was a decision about the future of Sai City. His Highness Li Tianlan's return this time is bound to start a new group. Saint told you this before, and now the conditions are met. The Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, and everything they lost can become the framework of His Highness Li Tianlan's new group. Drifting Cloud said calmly, "In this case, what role should Sai City play in the new group? Should it continue to stay in Mount Taibai, or should it have another direction?" Situ Cangyue looked at the wind and snow in front of her. The wind and snow were messy, passing through her sight. At that moment, it seemed that many years had passed. There were few people in Sai City, but it had a super strong cohesion that most forces did not have. Situ Cangyue was in the invincible realm. Tribulation was also in the invincible realm. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were superiors of the half-step invincible realm. There were 7 superiors above the Thundershocking realm in Sai City. There were nearly 100 assassins above the stabilization phase of the Fire-Flaming realm in Sai City. For today's Emperor Dong's palace, this was definitely an absolutely powerful force. It was also a force that could be digested by the current scale of Emperor Dong's palace. If Situ Cangyue did not intend to change anything, Sai City would still be Sai City. But if Sai City wanted to change its direction and play a more important role in the new group controlled by Li Tianlan, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, the other 5 Thundershocking realm assassins of Sai City, dozens of Fire-Flaming realm experts, all of them could find their own positions in the new group. Tsurutsangua lowered her head slightly and stared at the snow in front of her. The stunning sword in the 13-story building was still standing there, as if it was also staring at Tsurutsangua. Drifting Cloud looked ahead and opened his mouth. When he was about to say something, his eyes suddenly froze. His line of sight crossed a few kilometers ahead. In the wind and snow, in front of the shining gate of the barracks, a group of about hundreds of soldiers of Snow Country roared and rushed forward for a distance. At the forefront, a tall soldier held the flag of his legion and ran for hundreds of meters. Then he inserted the flag in the snow again. In the vision of an expert, a half-step to invincible realm, Drifting Cloud clearly saw that the flagrant military flag crossed the boundary monument of Zhongzhou State. The flag crossed the boundary monument in a short distance. It was even less than 1 meter. But the distance of dozens of centimeters was indeed the territory of Zhongzhou State. Drifting Cloud's face was livid, and he suddenly raised his hand. Suddenly, a dark blue electric arc lit up in the air where the snow was fluttering. The electric arc extended for hundreds of meters in the air and finally disappeared without a trace. A burst of indistinct laughter suddenly rang out. In his sight, the soldier of Snow Country holding the Legion flag gave a thumbs up to Drifting Cloud and Tsurutsangua, and then he pointed it down fiercely. He laughed and pulled out the flag. Once again, he rushed forward for tens of meters and directly inserted the flag in the snow of Zhongzhou State. A ghastly cry and wolf howl came from afar. Tsurutsangua looked at this scene expressionlessly. Bang! In the dull sound, a cannonball suddenly shot out from the small weapons base of Sai City, giving a warning. The soldiers of Snow Country took a step back, and then the ghastly cry and wolf howl became louder. The huge sound wave of hundreds of people successfully attracted the attention of the Snow Country barracks behind. More and more soldiers left the barracks and came over. The cannonball landed on the land 5 kilometers away from the army of Snow Country, making a loud noise. The rear of the Snow Country barracks instantly lit up with bright fire. Several huge cannonballs with burning tail flames crossed the sky and headed straight for Sai City. The cannonball flew in the air and finally exploded a large amount of snow at the foot of the mountain less than 1 kilometer away from Tsurutsangua. Drifting Cloud could even clearly feel the violent vibration of the ground. Drifting Cloud's face was livid. He gritted his teeth and spat out a swear word after a long while, F***CK. Tsurutsangua's eyes narrowed tightly. The world seemed to be tense for a moment. A cold and awe-inspiring voice rang out in the midst of the snowstorm. Scram! The voice of the invincible realm expert spread into the mountains, through the wind and snow, and directly echoed in the barracks of Snow Country. Tsurutsangua was responded by 2 cannonballs. The artillery roared. This time, the landing point of the artillery moved forward another 200 meters. This landing point was less than 100 meters away from the real edge of Sai City. F***CK, Governor, Qing Feng and I will kill our way over. Drifting Cloud suddenly took a step forward. No matter how calm he was, he couldn't stand this kind of provocation. In the past 20 years, Sai City had indeed stood aloof from the world, but who really dared to provoke them? Drifting Cloud couldn't stand this kind of arrogance. Don't be impulsive. Tsurutsangua shook her head. They just want us to rush over. Sai City is afraid of them? Drifting Cloud sneered and said, they are just clowns. How many people in Snow Country can be a match for Qing Feng and me? There may not be many individuals, but there is an army in front of us. Even if we can beat them back, their artillery is enough to destroy Sai City. Besides, they can withdraw from the national border at any time. If there is a dispute at that time, it is tantamount to making trouble for Tianlan. Tsurutsangua said calmly, ignore them. As long as I'm still here, they won't dare to act rashly. Since Tianlan has come out, we don't need to worry about the outside world. If they want to delay, let them. Drifting Cloud looked at the barracks opposite with a cold expression and said nothing. There were more and more soldiers of Snow Country in front of the military flag. A large number of soldiers of Snow Country stood blatantly on the land of Zhongzhou State, shouting and swearing. The language of Snow Country was mixed with English and a few words of poor Chinese. They were laughing and joking, but the content was full of the most vicious curses. Bitch, whore, all kinds of obscenities came along with the wind and snow. Situ Tsangyue took a deep breath, and her expression became colder. She quietly clenched her fists. Buzz! The startling sword, which had been standing in front of Situ Tsangyue, suddenly trembled and made a buzz. The sound was with clear excitement and desire. Boom! Another row of cannonballs came from the barracks of Snow Country. The fiery red light penetrated the wind and snow. Looking at the landing point, this row of cannonballs would almost certainly fall on the edge of Sai City. Situ Tsangyue suddenly looked up, and her pupils contracted. Her clenched fists trembled slightly, and she raised them for a moment. Her body, which was about to make a move, suddenly stiffened, and her face changed. An extremely fierce wind suddenly appeared over Sai City. The wind blew the snow. In an instant, there was a mighty and indescribable storm between heaven and earth. The whole world seemed to be suddenly quiet in an instant. Snowflakes fluttered. The fiery red light dragged by the cannonball disappeared almost instantly. Then the cannonball with great destructive power completely disintegrated. Situ Tsangyue suddenly raised her head and looked ahead with an extremely solemn face. Drifting Cloud was stunned. He opened his mouth, but suddenly found that he could not make a sound. The world became extremely quiet. The world was originally quiet. The sound of the fierce wind had already disappeared. But there was an extremely heavy airflow between heaven and earth. The airflow filled the world and turned into a silent gale. The gale rolled up the flying snow and turned into a storm. The storm did not seem to move fast. Or it did not move at all. Because the moment the storm formed, it had already filled the whole world. The crazy dancing snowflakes filled the sky, filled the valley, and occupied everything in sight. The silent wind. The flying blood. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they spun. Everything in Sai City was surrounded by the storm. Neither Situ Tsangyue nor Drifting Cloud could see the beginning or the end of the storm. Only the startling sword continued to vibrate, producing sword chimes one after another. Situ Tsangyue raised her head and looked at the swirling wind and snow in front of her, as if she was looking at a rotating world. Everywhere she looked, there was a vast expanse of white. There was no sound. In the state of extreme silence, the swirling snowflakes that filled the world seemed to gradually change color. The color deepened little by little and gradually faded. It seemed to be a light pink, then turned into a slight red, and finally became an extremely dazzling scarlet. All the snowflakes turned into a shocking red. The strong smell of blood rose on the extremely quiet blood mountain, which was extremely strange. Abruptly, the storm, which seemed to have been dyed red by blood, seemed to stop rotating. The speed of the storm was getting slower and slower. In the light footsteps, a figure passed through the storm and walked to Situ Tsangyue. He carried a soldier of Snow Country who had fainted in his hand and said with a smile, "Aunt Situ, long time no see." Chapter 893. Situ Tsangyue stared blankly at the figure coming out of the storm. The bloody storm between heaven and earth had solidified. His pace was neither fast nor slow. As if nothing had happened, he did it as if it were light and understated. This was an indescribable casualness and indifference. She heard him call her Aunt Situ. That face was still so familiar. But in Situ Tsangyue's heart, he seemed to be a completely different person. He might still be him. But in more than 2 years, whether it was spirit, mentality, or martial arts, he seemed to have transformed and sublimated to another level. "Lan," she called out subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded and threw the soldier of Snow Country to the ground. The soldier was majestic and burly, wearing a neat military uniform. Judging from his rank, he was a general. At this time, he was lying on the ground like a dead pig, silent. Li Tianlan looked down at him and fell silent. He didn't speak. The world became dead silent in an instant. The indescribable bloody storm seemed to be slowing down. It also seemed to be accelerating. The rotation of the storm became more and more blurred, as if it was too fast or too slow, and finally became a state of complete stillness. There was only a still blood red in front of drifting cloud. The pungent smell of blood filled the air like water. The red in front of him occupied everything in sight. The snow was gone. The mountains were gone. The valley was gone. All he could see was the still red. He couldn't hear any sound, and he couldn't see the opposite barracks. In the indescribable silence, drifting cloud's chest became more and more stuffy, and he only felt that his whole body became heavier and heavier. In a trance, the still storm seemed to make the first roar. It was a very familiar sound. It was like a strong wind blowing up the snow. Snowflakes were flying in the air, like white catkins all over the sky. Drifting clouds stared at the still red in front of him. The still red began to rotate again, faster and faster, with an extremely sharp sound. The almost dark red began to fade, mixed with white, and rotated wildly. Li Tianlan still stood, silently looking down at the unconscious general of Snow Country at his feet. The faintly discernible sword chi kept vibrating around him. The bloody storm became thinner and thinner with the vibration of the sword energy. Faintly, drifting clouds saw the valleys and peaks blocked by the bloody storm. The smell of blood began to surge. The bloody storm became more and more chaotic. White snow. The red blood spread wildly in all directions. The process seemed slow, but it was also extremely fast. It seemed to only take a breath's time. The storm was gone. The red that filled the sky also disappeared. The silence turned into silence. Lu Yun subconsciously took a deep breath and looked at his surroundings. They were still standing in the same place. There was no change in the snow mountain. The valley remained unchanged. Sai City remained unchanged. Lu Yun looked at everything that was familiar to him and his eyes suddenly froze. An incomprehensible emotion arose in his eyes, and it transformed into astonishment, shock, absurdity, and finally a wisp of indescribable terror. His body stiffened on the spot, like a petrified statue. The sound of rapid and heavy breathing came out from the side of his mouth. His eyes were opened to the widest, staring in the direction of the Snow Empire military camp. In his line of sight, the boundary monument was still there. The flag of Snow Country Corps on the land of Zhongzhou State was still there. The military camp of Snow Country was still brightly lit. Lu Yun recalled the blood-colored storm. He had thought that after the storm he would see countless corpses, a large scene of suffering, and Li Tianlan's current strength, but no, there was nothing. He didn't see the corpses or the wounded. It was quiet on Mount Taibai. Everything in sight was white snow. No corpses, no wounded, no army, no army. No army. The military camp of Snow Country was still there. But in that quiet storm, all the creatures in the Snow Empire's military camp had completely disappeared. It was as if they had never existed. Lu Yun opened his mouth, like a dying fish. All this was beyond his imagination, even if he was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. A subtle sound rang in the valley. In an instant, the sword energy that seemed to cover the world began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who had been quiet, moved and breathed out softly. Sidu Zhongyue took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Compared with Lu Yun, she naturally knew the power of that sword move better. That was really tearing everything apart. At that moment, the area covered by the storm became the domain of sword energy. Pure sword energy. Countless strands of sword chi surged within the domain. Every strand of sword chi collided with other strands of sword chi countless times. The sword chi shattered into even smaller strands of sword chi. The vast sword energy completely tore the corpses of the soldiers of Snow Country, leaving no trace of their existence. No, there might still be traces, but all the blood had been covered by snow. There were 2 legions and several elites of Snow Country from the Special Warfare Agency. This kind of sword energy, as far as Situ Zhongyue knew, there seemed to be only one person who could do it. Wang Tianzong. It was Wang Tianzong before Eastern Europe. This was the power that faintly surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But she was an invincible realm superior and could roughly feel Li Tianlan's state. Whether it was his age or his actual performance, he didn't seem to have really entered the invincible realm. So how did he do it? Sidu Zhongyue quietly looked at Li Tianlan, who was motionless. She was a little relieved, but also inexplicably upset. Your Highness. This. Lu Yun finally came back to his senses and stammered. Why you here? Sidu Zhongyue smiled and said, It's not urgent here. No, it's urgent. Li Tianlan shook his head. He slowly moved his arm. Crack. In an instant, the sound of countless joints vibrating came out of Li Tianlan's body. His face turned pale for a moment. In Lu Yun's sight, he clearly saw a shocking bloodstain on Li Tianlan's arm. Li Tianlan's skin suddenly began to break at some point, spreading to his 5 fingers, palms, back of hands, wrists, and even to the invisible place in his sleeves. One of his arms was like broken glass, densely packed and full of cracks for a while. Situ Zhongyue's eyes suddenly froze. Li Tianlan looked at his arm expressionlessly. This was the hand that held the sword. His cracked palm slowly clenched into a fist. Fresh blood flowed down his chest and palms, falling onto the snowy ground. It was a ghastly sight. I'm fine, he said in a low voice. Situ Zhongyue did not speak. She stared at his palm, and her eyes trembled slightly. The blood dripping quickly became less and less. There seemed to be a dense mist in Li Tianlan's palm. Large patches of blood and dense cracks began to become blurred in the mist. Li Tianlan's body slowly relaxed and kicked the general of Snow Country under his feet. The general groaned and opened his eyes blankly. His memory was still stuck just now. He was just ordering the artillery of the barracks to fire again when he was suddenly pulled by a hand. When he woke up, he was here. Where was this place? The general was slightly shocked and suddenly got up. He saw Li Tianlan, Zhongyue, and Drifting Cloud, as well as his empty and silent barracks. Where's my army? He said subconsciously and finally realized where he was. It didn't matter where he was. What mattered was who was beside him. The general's face was pale and he took a step forward subconsciously. A subtle sound was heard accompanied by screams. Countless densely packed sword chi enveloped everything around the general. He took a step forward and his body directly hit a large piece of sword energy. The sword energy went deep into his body. In an instant his military uniform was directly dyed red with blood. The general howled wildly, and his eyes were filled with pain and fear. Name. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at him condescendingly. No, the general answered in a trembling voice. Countless sword energy went deep into his body and did not seem to disappear at all. Instead, they were destroying his flesh and blood bit by bit as if they were alive. The unprepared encounter almost crushed his will at once. It's too long, I can't remember. Li Tianlan said lightly, just call him Tatev, it's Takov. The general groaned in his heart, but his Chinese was a little bad, and he was not in the mood to explain anything. His body curled up and kept trembling under the pain. Your army has crossed the boundary. Li Tianlan looked at him and said quietly. Yes, yes. General Takov shouted. He wanted to raise his voice, but his words were extremely weak. I'm willing to apologize on behalf of my army. Who do you think you are? Li Tianlan looked at him silently. Your apology is worthless. He reached out and grabbed Takov's bloody body, pointing to the flag of Snow Country that was still stuck in the snow of Zhongzhou State. Did you see it? Li Tianlan asked. Takov nodded frantically. His legs gradually became wet, and a suspicious liquid flowed down his trousers. Now contact your boss. Li Tianlan's voice was low and gloomy. Before dark, there must be a person who can represent Snow Country. The president, the prime minister, your defense general, anyone. Ask him to come here, pull out your flag from the land of Zhongzhou State, and make a public apology. Otherwise, within half a month, I will personally put the star flag of Zhongzhou State in front of the gate of your capital. He paused and looked at Takov. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Takov kept nodding. Li Tianlan casually threw him to the ground and said calmly, I'm here waiting for your country's apology. A Drifting Cloud's body trembled, and he did not dare to speak for a while. Situ Tsangyue took a deep breath and suddenly laughed. At this moment, she seemed to have made up her mind. Chapter 894. General Tarkov, whose full name was unknown, tremblingly took out his mobile phone. It was obvious that the general of Snow Country stationed at the border was frightened, and his voice trembled when he called his superior. Li Tianlan didn't understand Russian and didn't bother to listen to what he was talking about on the phone. He just reached out and touched the hilt of the startling sword, as if saying hello. The startling sword trembled slightly, and the hilt rubbed against Li Tianlan's palm. It looked very happy. It's hard for the representatives of Snow Country to come before dark. Sidu Tsangyue looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. To some extent, Snow Country's bureaucracy in some aspects could be said to be the most serious in the world. The story of destroying 2 legions in a storm outside Sai City was indeed shocking enough. But Snow Country, as one of the toughest nations in the world, could hardly be completely subdued because of this. They might compromise, but Li Tianlan didn't leave any room for compromise. Li Tianlan's requirement was that before dark, the president, prime minister, or the defense general of Snow Country should apologize in person, walk to the border of Zhongzhou state, and take their flag back. Even if the high-level individuals would be frightened by Li Tianlan, the army of Snow Country couldn't bear this kind of humiliation. It was equivalent to an outsider asking Zhongzhou state to make Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, or Dongqing Wudi apologize and pull out the flag planted by their own soldiers. This was a great humiliation. So in Situ Tsangyue's view, not only before dark, the 3 giants of Snow Country might not come back at all. Even more exaggeratedly, the news wouldn't reach the ears of the 3 giants in a short time. I know. Li Tianlan said quietly. Sidu Tsangyue answered with some doubts. So I gave them half a month. Li Tianlan said slowly, even if I have shown enough strength, it's easy for them to focus on other places. The chaos in Beihai is close at hand. It's normal that the military camp of Snow Country doesn't retreat and the high-level officials of Snow Country don't come, because they are waiting for the end of Beihai. And the state of your sword? Sidu Tsangyue said calmly. He destroyed 2 legions with 1 sword strike. Even if it was an army formed by 2 groups of people, such destructive power was enough to make people feel like their guts were being torn apart. But in comparison, this sword was still inferior to the sword light that could reach tens of thousands of meters in an instant in the desert. The theory that Li Tianlan's strength was based on murderous weapons was very popular in the Dark World. So even without the 2 legions, Snow Country would still attribute this to the power of Xin Yuanfeng. And in the chaotic battle in North Sea, Xin Yuanfeng's energy would inevitably be consumed quickly or even completely exhausted. Without energy, Xin Yuanfeng was just an invincible godly weapon. Naturally, Li Tianlan's state was flawed. I don't care about that. Li Tianlan shook his head. Your Highness, you just said that you will wait here for the higher-ups of Snow Empire. Lu Yun tried his best to calm down. His smile was a little stiff, and his voice was a little cautious. Li Tianlan said, that way, I can ask for more compensation from them in half a month. Because I waited for them for the whole afternoon. Sidu Tsangyue looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. After a long while, she suddenly reached out and touched his head. Li Tianlan laughed. He might not be handsome, but his young and clean face was confident and warm when he smiled, like the sunshine in the flying snow. He silently looked at the empty and silent camp of Snow Country and was silent for a while. Everything that happened here today would not be meaningless. All the losses of Snow Country would be counted on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao now controlled the dark world of Snow Country, but he only cooperated with the higher-ups of Snow Country. Perhaps he occupied a dominant position, but he was far from being able to do whatever he wanted. Half a month. Li Tianlan was going to use this half a month to end everything at present. Half a month later, he would let the whole dark world have his voice. He gently tapped on the hilt of graceful sword and found that the general of Snow Country had hung up the phone and looked at him with a little nervous eyes. As a general of Snow Country, he obviously knew the situation of his country better than anyone else. So he collapsed on the snow with blood all over his body, and there was some despair in his eyes. The result? Li Tianlan said casually. Takov tried his best to smile. His smile was uglier than crying. He was promoted to the military rank last year and was not from Zhongzhou State. He didn't know Li Tianlan and didn't know how to call him, so he could only skip this step and said directly, "No, my boss. My boss said he would report this to the president." His voice was a little trembling. But, no buts. Li Tianlan shook his head. "You can kneel here before the people of Snow Country come." Countless visible sword energy intertwined in front of him and spread upward quickly. Takov's face was pale, and he subconsciously propped up his upper body. The sword energy went straight from his chest to the top of his head. He remained kneeling and was completely shrouded by the sword energy. In this case, as long as his body moved more than 5 centimeters, his whole body would be cut into countless pieces by the sword energy. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Sai City behind him. "Auntie, let's go back and talk." His voice was a little deep. "Okay." Situ Tsangyue nodded. "Have you had lunch? I'll have someone prepare it." He gave Lu Yun a wink. Lu Yun nodded and quickly turned to arrange lunch. "Not yet. I heard that the snow chicken here is good. I'll try it later," Li Tianlan said with a smile. Situ Tsangyue gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved like crescent moons, and the thin crow's feet showed at the corners of her eyes. She was extremely beautiful and kind. "It's a little late. I'll cook for you next time." "Okay." Li Tianlan smiled but did not move. Situ Tsangyue finally realized something. Her expression was a little dignified. "Now I'm fine," Li Tianlan said softly. He stood where he was and moved his body slightly. The range of that kind of movement was too small, even smaller than a slight tremble. It seemed that he had been standing where he was. Situ Tsangyue's eyes were a little worried. She suddenly said, "I'll carry you on my back." "No need." Li Tianlan took a deep breath and suddenly took a step forward. Sizzle? In the slight sound, it seemed that something was breaking, and the liquid was squeezed out. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, suddenly frowned. A lot of blood came out from his body in an instant. Li Tianlan's face grew paler. Blood soaked his whole body in an instant. Under the cover of the black windbreaker, Situ Tsangyue could only see a small part of his trousers stained with blood and his chest that was not covered by the windbreaker. Li Tianlan raised the corner of his mouth, and the short syllable became a little distorted. Situ Tsangyue tightly pursed her lips. After a while, she said hoarsely, "Your body is too fragile. This is the price of invincibility," Li Tianlan whispered. It seemed that because of the pain, his voice was a little gloomy. "But it's not unbearable." He slowly stepped forward. The blood became more and more as he moved. Li Tianlan left a very obvious bloodstain on the road he walked. And for me, such a price is not unbearable. There was no way for him to enter the invincible realm at this age. He could only take another path. Unorthodox way? Unorthodox way? Whatever it was, he was now indeed standing at the peak of personal force in the dark world. He would pay a little price. But he had the dragon vein, and his body's amazing recovery ability was enough to suppress this price to a bearable range. For Li Tianlan, as long as he could bear it, there was no price. He walked faster and faster. Wisps of dense mist gradually spread from his arms to his whole body. He walked in the snow all over the mountain, and his body became more and more blurred. At nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the wounds on Li Tianlan's body had completely healed. His aura was still a little weak, but it was recovering every moment. He took a shower in the room used for entertaining guests and changed his clothes. A sumptuous lunch had been prepared in the small restaurant of Sai City. The high-level officials of Sai City gathered together and waited quietly for Li Tianlan. Situ Tsangyue introduced everyone to Li Tianlan very seriously. Cool breeze, drifting cloud, and deep dream could all be said to be acquaintances. In addition, there were 4 experts above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. Hui Yue, a petite and silent assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Wildfire, an assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who was born in Azura Path but took the initiative to join Sai City. Wukong was the oldest and the first to follow Situ Tsangyu. Nowadays, he seldom went down the mountain and played the role of the butler of Sai City. The other one was not present, but Li Tianlan was most familiar with her. She was Du Han-in, who was a latecomer among the several veteran assassins of Sai City. There was also a thunder-shocking realm assassin who died in Europe more than a year ago. Now, in front of Li Tianlan was the top lineup of Sai City. Of course, Li Tianlan still remembered another name of Sai City. That was also the purpose of his coming here today. Li Tianlan shook hands with everyone and then sat in the main seat that Situ Tsangyue intentionally or unintentionally left for him. He didn't say much and just began to eat quietly. There was no wine on the table and no one who was good at talking, so the atmosphere was a little dull, but not solemn. Li Tianlan didn't put down his bowl and chopsticks until everyone slowed down. He looked at the crowd and said slowly, "In a short time, Snow Country won't come to apologize, but they won't continue to send troops here." No one spoke and looked at Li Tianlan attentively. Li Tianlan gently knocked on the table and said in a low and soft tone, "I have one thing that I need your help with." "Go ahead." Situ Tsangyue smiled softly. "I have no problem with going to Beihai with your highness. I believe everyone here will." Cool Breeze said with a smile, including Wukong the old guy. Wukong, whose hair was a little gray, smiled. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "I can still move my old bones. If your highness needs me, just say the word. I also miss the days when I fought side by side with your highness." Deep Dream laughed and seemed to recall the time in East Island. "I have no problem." Radiant Moon and Wildfire spoke at the same time. "Not to Beihai. I can solve the problem in Beihai by myself." Li Tianlan took a deep look at them and said quietly. Situ Tsangyue raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyelids, knocked on the table and said slowly, "I hope Sai City can go to East Island." His voice was as soft as the wind. But in Situ Tsangyue's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Her smile froze for a moment, and it seemed a little unnatural. All the people present were top assassins. They almost instantly caught the change in Situ Tsangyue's expression. The dining table became quiet. Li Tianlan calmly took a sip of tea and said nothing. It was certain that East Island's Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace would participate in the final battle in Beihai. Not only the two major martial arts sects of East Island, but also Beihai, to be exact, the southern area of Beihai Province. East Island was determined to get it this time. In their eyes, that was their land. So all the intelligence showed that in the special warfare system of East Island, personnel were transferred frequently, and it was clear that they intended to go all out to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Under such circumstances, East Island was bound to be empty again. Just like in the final battle in Heaven Capital 5 years ago. The old things seemed to be reincarnated again. It was the same situation. 5 years ago, a considerable number of experts from East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State, including 2 invincible realm grandmasters from East Island. And this time, 2 invincible realm grandmasters of East Island were about to be involved in Beihai. The only difference was that Li Tianlan was not qualified to fight for anything 5 years ago. But now, 5 years later, he wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. Li Tianlan was qualified to fight for anything, and any resources. Emperor Dong's palace was rooted in Tiannan and would gradually spread to the entire Southeast Asia. Although East Island was small, it was enough to be a barrier for Emperor Dong's palace in some aspects. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe were the foundation laid by Li Tianlan. The military flag movement gave Li Tianlan a reason to intervene in Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe gradually established contact with the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. The treason conspiracy of the Special Warfare Group could also allow Li Tianlan to gradually replace Kunlun City. Zhongzhou State, Southeast Asia, East Island, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. Li Tianlan could fight for everything. As long as he had enough time to digest all these, Emperor Dong's palace would become the real overlord of the Dark World. This was the era of Donghuang. There might be obstacles in front of Li Tianlan, but after Mormon's eternal sword, there was no insurmountable mountain in front of him. Everything he wanted was no longer a future that he could look forward to. But now was the time. If he wanted it, he would get it. East Island was determined to get Beihai. Li Tianlan was determined to get East Island. It was a race against time. So he wanted to go to Sai City. Not only Sai City. Mount Shu, which could not intervene in the final battle of Beihai, would also go there. Situ Tsangyue. Wei Kunlun. He wanted the only two invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State to completely overturn East Island. Li Tianlan picked up the cup in front of him and drank some water. He turned his head and looked at Situ Tsangyue quietly. Situ Tsangyue said nothing. She looked at Li Tianlan with a pale face. Li Tianlan looked away. His expression grew calmer. Chapter 895. The atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. Everyone could feel the stalemate at the dining table. Li Tianlan held the cup and tapped it thoughtfully. His expression was as calm as water, and he said nothing. Situ Tsangyue slightly lowered her head and also said nothing. Cool breeze and drifting clouds seemed somewhat nervous. They sat there motionlessly, not making any unnecessary movements. Deep Dream wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she did not speak. Sai City was definitely willing to accept Li Tianlan's order, and the interior of East Island would become empty as the final battle of Beihai progressed. Sai City, Mount Shu. In today's dark world, in terms of high-end force, the combination of the two forces would not be weaker than any superpower in its heyday. The hidden god of Zhongzhou State, the Nirvana Sword Master. Two invincible realm experts. Qing Feng, Lu Yun, Phantom Sword Master, Yin Yang Sword Master. 4 half-step invincible realm experts. This kind of lineup was exaggerated enough at any time, and it had the ability to overturn the whole East Island to meet Li Tianlan's requirements. But the problem was that Situ Tsangyue didn't want to go to East Island. Not because of East Island itself. It was not because of Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace. It was because of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Although its strength had been shifting in the past 2 years, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital still had a lot of influence in East Island. Because of Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Or perhaps there were others. The atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. Qing Feng forced a smile and opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were calm, and could even be said to be clear. However, Qing Feng suddenly lost the courage to speak and lowered his head in silence. He understood Li Tianlan's eyes. So calm, so determined. All he wanted was an answer. There was no need for a reason. To East Island, Situ Tsangyue finally spoke. Her face was a little pale, and her smile was a little forced, but her voice was still gentle. How far do you want to go? Li Tianlan tapped the glass in his hand with his fingers. Quiet and indifferent. Those who obey me shall prosper, those who oppose me shall perish. With a calm voice, he gave his answer. An answer that left no room for discussion. Situ Tsangyue's body shook slightly and she said in a low voice, including nothing. Li Tianlan interrupted her and said softly, I just want what I want, that's all. That was all. Nothing was included, which meant that everything was included. What he wanted was East Island. So everything in East Island was no different to Li Tianlan. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Reigning School, Purgatory of Heaven Capital, all the dark forces. Those who obey me will prosper, those who oppose me will perish. Situ Tsangyue suddenly stood up. She glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked up at her, his eyes clear and soft. Come with me. Situ Tsangyue suddenly said and walked out of the restaurant. She walked quietly in front, down the stairs, and out the door. In front of him was still the same unchanging snowstorm, vast and boundless. Situ Tsangyue walked quietly. She was in a trance. Li Tianlan followed her, silent and indifferent. The wind and snow fluttered the black cloak he was wearing, and the long hem of the cloak floated gently in the wind and snow. The complicated and dense golden patterns on the cloak formed mysterious patterns one after another in the transformation of the cloak. Li Tianlan stood straight, exuding an extremely sharp majesty. "What if I refuse?" Sidu Zhangyue suddenly whispered. Li Tianlan didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, "I can understand." "What if I refuse?" Sidu Zhangyue asked again in a faint tone. "Then Mount Shu will go by itself, and Saint will lead the team," Li Tianlan said. Sidu Zhangyue smiled and kept walking. She repeated again, "What if I refuse?" Li Tianlan was silent for a while, chuckled, and repeated his first answer. "I can understand." He said, "Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish?" Situ Zhangyue laughed. "How could it be?" Li Tianlan couldn't help laughing. "I respect your choice. If Sai City refuses, I will go down the mountain. No one will perish. Sai City will always be a friend of Emperor Dong's palace. You are not included." He couldn't forget what Sai City had done for him, so he really understood. He didn't mind Situ Zhangyue refusing his request, but he would regret it. If he left Sai City today and returned without accomplishing anything, then it seemed that Sai City was destined to go on a completely different path from Emperor Dong's palace. "They are not included." Sidu Zhangyue's voice was low. Li Tianlan looked at Sidu Zhangyue with a smile and said softly, "Really? Isn't it?" Sidu Zhangyue looked at Li Tianlan with sharp eyes. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said lightly, "I haven't thought about this, and it's not what I should think about. Before my grandfather died, he handed the Li family to me. Different people may have different answers, but in my eyes, the Li family is my Li family, and I don't accept betrayal." "That's not betrayal." Situ Zhangyue's voice was a little excited. "That's your answer." Li Tianlan said softly, "In my eyes, it's betrayal. Including Li Guangtu. Including the old man standing next to Li Guangtu. Many people, betrayal. In Li Tianlan's eyes, they were betrayers. In their eyes, Li Tianlan might also be a betrayal. They were the same. I can accept different ideas just like Sai City now. Auntie, I won't blame you whether you help me or not, but I won't accept betrayal." He looked at Situ Zhangyue and whispered, "I'm here to confirm one thing." Situ Zhangyue bit her lip and did not speak. Li Tianlan's voice became somewhat cold. "The Heavenly Parish Palace. Whose Heavenly Parish Palace is it?" Many years ago, after the collapse of the Li family, Li Honghe gave up everything on the surface. It had gathered most of the Li family's power and allowed the Li family to complete nirvana after a long period of dormancy. Countless elders of the Li family left the cage of the Li family, left Zhongzhou State, and formed a new organization. That was the prototype of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. In other words, it was the new Li family. It was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that Li Honghe planned to leave to Li Tianlan, and the brand new Li family that Li Tianlan planned to leave to Li Tianlan. Sunluo Hall, Long Life Hall, and Athanasi Hall became the main combat forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. They were also the powerful armed forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital to deter all forces. But this was not the complete Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The complete Purgatory of Heaven Capital had 5 departments: Limitless, Longevity, Undying, Heaven's Net, Heaven's Fall. Tian Luo was in charge of intelligence. Meteorite was a knife hidden in the dark. A killing knife. This saber also had another name, Sai City of Zhongzhou State. Sai City had always been the most important department of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Li family. Li Tianlan thought that the Li family was his own. But Heavenly Fall, was it his Heavenly Fall or Li Guangtu's Heavenly Fall? In the wind and snow, Sidu Zhangyue's face became paler. Li Tianlan's question left her with no room to avoid it. Sai City could be a pure Sai City. It could be Li Tianlan's heavenly meteor. Li Tianlan wouldn't mind. But if she chose Li Guangtu, she would be the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. She didn't want to be Li Tianlan's enemy or leave the Li family, so she had to go to East Island. Overturn everything in East Island with the attitude of, "Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish." He overturned Wuji Palace, Jifeng's sword reigning school, and everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Break everything that belonged to the purgatory of Heaven Capital and turn it into something that belonged to Li Tianlan. This was tantamount to becoming enemies with Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu was her man. I used to be. But he was also the only man she had intimate contact with in her life. You will kill him. Situ Tsangyue lowered her eyebrows and whispered. Li Tianlan knew who she was referring to. After a long silence, he thought of Li Honghe. Shaking his head slightly, he whispered, probably not. He said probably. Situ Tsangyue also thought of Li Honghe. Perhaps until now, Li Guangtu didn't understand that her meeting with him was not an accident. It came from an old man's arrangement. The very first arrangement. Situ Tsangyue laughed. Her vision was a little blurry. She lowered her head slightly and whispered, Sai City will go to East Island. After a pause, she gave the clearest answer, Heavenly Meteor Palace will go to East Island. Li Tianlan looked at her silently. His eyes were no longer looking at an elder, but looking at an important part of his power map soberly and rationally. He would give her the greatest trust, and also give her the most solemn promise. Li Tianlan nodded. His voice shook the wind and snow. There is a place for you in my dynasty. Yes. Situ Tsangyue lowered her head. Her voice was sad and a little dazed, but it was extremely clear. Your Majesty. Chapter 896. When she opened her eyes, the room was gloomy and gloomy. The clock on the wall was ticking. She moved and looked at the time. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether it was day or night. The curtains were closed, there was no sunlight outside, and it was quiet around. Bai Yuming sat up, put on her slippers, opened the curtains, and saw the vast snow outside. It seemed to be afternoon. It was going to be dark. She shook her head with difficulty and subconsciously touched the wounds on her body. The feeling of weakness was still there, and her whole body was soft. Her ears seemed to be still echoing the raging artillery fire. All kinds of weapons shone in different colors and roared unscrupulously in the desert under the night sky. The earth-shattering sound seemed to have been imprinted in the depths of her heart. It was the explosion, the blood, and the flying yellow sand. Bai Yuming stood by the window and looked out. The surroundings were quiet and warm. Outside the window was flying snowflakes. Yesterday, today. What she thought and what she saw seemed to be two completely different worlds. She stood on the edge of the world, and her whole person had a sense of being torn apart. Her spirit was not tense, but she still did not completely relax. Chaotic memories kept rolling. She remembered that she helped Li Tianlan clean up the bodies of the dead in the desert. She remembered that she flew to Suzhou with the helicopter from Suzhou. She did not return to Tiannan in Suzhou, but returned to Yuzhou. Home. Bai Yuming was at a loss for a long time before she realized that she was at home, in her room. No matter what the outcome of last night's war was, it was over. She touched the wounds on her body. Countless wounds, big and small, had healed and formed scabs. The Dongqing clan and the Bai family naturally had a way to remove scars. Her injury was not too serious, and there was no serious problem on the surface of her body. The internal injury still needed to rest for a period of time. The main thing was the weakness brought by mental exhaustion and severe exhaustion, which made her weak. There was also the sequela brought by the Taoist madness. The Taoist madness, she thought of Azura Path. She thought of her commander. Her knife pierced into his chest. They said goodbye. Said goodbye. Bai Yuming was silent for a long time. It was hard for her to describe her psychological feelings. It was a little low, but not heart-wrenching. She was muddle-headed. That knife seemed to have merged with every picture of the Desert War. Perhaps it was a little special, but they were indeed fused together. Bai Yuming grabbed her hair. She had liked him before. In the past, she shook her head again and drank the recovery potion on the bedside table. She changed out of her pajamas and put on some loose clothes before walking out of her room. A burst of hearty laughter came from downstairs. It sounded familiar. Bai Yuming stood on the railing of the corridor and looked down, slightly stunned. On the sofa in the living room downstairs, a man in his 30s was watching. The calm and composed man sat there, talking happily with his grandfather Bai Zhanfeng. Although he was a junior, he showed no fear and trepidation in the face of the most senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. His every move was free and easy, and his momentum was magnificent. Bai Zhanfeng sat opposite him with a smile. His face was ruddy and he seemed to be in a good mood. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes and forced herself to wake up from her muddle-headed state. She adjusted her mood and chuckled, "Brother-in-law, long time no see. What a rare guest. I thought the speaker had forgotten where the Bai family is." Bai Zhanfeng raised his head and glanced at his granddaughter, smiling without saying a word. Opposite him, Zhou Yuanshan, who was now the speaker of Jiangxia, raised his head and glared at Bai Yuming. He scolded with a smile, "How dare you call me brother-in-law? Every time you open your mouth, you call me brother-in-law. I think you've forgotten about me, your brother. I am 1 year older than Qiuqi. Qiuqi has always called me sister. It's right to call you brother-in-law." Bai Yuming raised the corner of her mouth and sped up her pace to go downstairs. Zhou Yuanshan shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. In this generation of the 3 pillars of the giant group, he, Bai Yuming, and Dongcheng Qiuqi were close in age. They could be said to be childhood friends. He was 4 years older than Dongcheng Qiuqi, and Bai Yuming was 1 year older than Dongcheng Qiuqi. In this way, Bai Yuming, who called Zhou Yuanshan brother since childhood, always regarded herself as sister after they got married. When they got married, if Zhou Yuanshan didn't call her sister, he almost couldn't get into the bridal chamber. It was a dark history with no moral integrity. Now, every time he met Bai Yuming, she called him brother-in-law, which made his scalp numb. Bai Yuming went downstairs and poured herself a glass of water. She sat on the sofa casually and looked at Zhou Yuanshan. "Are you here for a meeting?" 3 months at the political college. Zhou Yuanshan smiled. It was an exception for him to serve as the speaker of Jiangxia. Letting Dongcheng Qiuqi serve as the governor of Jiangxia was the first in history. The speaker and the governor of a province were husband and wife. This was not only unprecedented, but also unprecedented. Dongcheng Qiuqi received the admission notice from the political college soon after she took office. Now she had just returned to Jiangxia. With the gradual improvement of the situation, especially the stability of Jiangxia, Zhou Yuanshan naturally couldn't avoid this process. Political college, tut, advanced course? Is the speaker going to become a member of parliament? Bai Yuming smiled. Zhou Yuanshan picked up a pillow and threw it at her. Bai Yuming took the pillow and held it in her arms. "You are more optimistic than me." Zhou Yuanshan shook his head. Training course. The study in the political college was generally divided into advanced course and training course. Entering the advanced course basically meant that the officials were going to be promoted or had been promoted, and the latter meant to recharge. Of course, in some special periods, there would be other good or bad interpretations. Zhou Yuanshan's qualifications were indeed shallow when compared with the position of governor, especially the speaker. The training course at the level of governor was barely gilded. "Oh," Bai Yuming answered, holding the pillow and saying nothing. She forced herself to behave normally, but she was extremely tired both mentally and mentally. Sitting on the sofa, her eyes were a little dull. She found that she hadn't slept enough. Didn't have a good rest? Bai Zhanfeng glanced at her and asked with a smile. "It's mainly because I'm not used to it." Bai Yuming shook her head silently. "From the battlefield to home, I still need to take a rest. Is the injury serious?" Zhou Yuanshan asked. "The injury is not serious, but I feel very tired." Bai Yuming shook her head. "Tired?" Bai Zhanfeng and Zhou Yuanshan fell silent at the same time. More than 1,000 victims in Emperor Dong's palace. And Yang Shaoxiong, who died in the hands of Bai Yuming. These were all reasons that made Bai Yuming feel tired. Zhou Yuanshan thought for a moment and smiled reluctantly. "Qiuqi should be on the plane now. I arranged for the secretary to pick her up. After dinner, let her talk with you. Maybe you will feel better." Bai Yuming blinked her eyes, showed a smile, and said yes. She and Dongchun Chiochi hadn't seen each other for a while. If, Bai Zhanfang frowned. If you really feel tired, take a break for a while. He said softly, don't go to Tian'an during this time. Stay at home with me. Well, Tianlan will come in the evening. You tell him. Tianlan is coming? Bai Yuming was a little surprised. Family dinner. Everyone will come. Your grandpa Dongchun will also come. Bai Zhanfang chuckled. What happened? Looking at her grandpa's glowing face, Bai Yuming was a little expectant. Good news. Bai Zhanfang couldn't hide his smile. It's all good news. The door of the villa was pushed open. A graceful and beautiful figure walked into the villa. Before seeing Bai Zhanfang, she had already laughed cheerfully. Then I'm back. She took off her coat and walked into the living room. Zhou Yuanshan had already stood up at the first time and called her mom. Bai Qingqian smiled and waved her hand to let Zhou Yuanshan sit down. She sat next to Bai Yuming, reached out to touch her head, and asked softly, How is your injury? Bai Yuming held a pillow, slowly leaned against Bai Qingqian's arms, and shook her head. Bai Qingqian quietly held her niece and didn't speak for a while. What do you want to eat tonight? It's time to prepare dinner. Bai Zhanfang asked. Bai Qingqian smiled. At this moment, her whole body seemed to be shining with a kind of soft brilliance. I just talked to Tianlan on the phone. It's snowing and he wants to eat hot pot. Bai Zhanfang smiled and nodded. Yes, it's warm. Bai Qingqian nodded. Tianlan said he had something to discuss with me. What is it? Bai Zhanfang was a little stunned. I don't know. Bai Qingqian smiled softly. But no matter what it is, her voice paused for a moment before she continued, I agree. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.